Chapter 1477. The Ascension receptionist stared blankly at the black-robed man in front of him. He could sense the celestial aura emanating from him, as well as the dozens of celestial auras behind him. The only female receptionist among the receptionists blinked a few times and glanced at the people next to her. "What's wrong with you guys? It's only been a few years since we last met. Don't tell me you don't recognize me?" The black-robed man smiled as he walked to the front of the leader of the reception team and extended his hand. The leader hurriedly extended his hand and bowed to greet him carefully. "Brother Yi know, Senior Yi." The newcomer was none other than Yi Zichen. As for the receptionists in front of the Ascension Pool, they were none other than the ones Yi Zichen had met on the northern Divine Mountain. Yi Zichen didn't know whether to laugh or cry when Huang Yang called him Senior Yi, while the others also looked at him in terror. The people of the god race all knew that the person who was bestowed with the word absolute would definitely have extraordinary achievements in the future. But who could have guessed that the young man who had ascended the Divine Mountains only a few years ago was already a Deva-level senior, and was even in command of so many Deva-level experts? "Don't call me Senior Yi. It makes me look old. Just call me Brother Yi like when we first met. That way, I'll feel more comfortable." Yi Zichen nodded towards them with a smile, then looked towards the female receptionist. Lu Baiwei, the team beauty, looks even prettier than before. Lu Baiwei blushed when she heard that. Family raised his voice. "Who was the one who said that the absolute freak wouldn't recognize us after a few years? Doesn't Brother Yi recognize us? He even remembers our names clearly." Family, Huang Yang frowned. Huang Yang was a rather old-fashioned person. From his perspective, Yi Zichen's friendliness was due to him giving them face. But at the end of the day, there was a huge gap between their realms. The other party was giving face, but they shouldn't be too presumptuous on the surface. Pang Li rubbed his nose resentfully after being scolded by Huang Yang. He didn't say anything else. Yi Zichen looked around them for a while, then smiled. "Why are you guys here? Weren't you supposed to be at the Northern Divine Mountain?" Duty rotation. The Ascension Pawns of the 9 Divine Mountains always take turns receiving missions. On the other hand, Brother Yi, could it be that you're here too? "I'm here to pick up some friends." At this moment, someone waved at him from the Ascension Pool. Yi Zichen smiled towards Huang Yang and company before walking towards the Ascension Pond. The majestic group of more than 20 Celestials left with them, leaving Huang Yang and the others to watch their backs. "I can't believe he's already a Deva." Lu Baiwei sighed. When she first met Yi Zichen, she'd already been on the verge of breaking through to the Sky Supreme level. Even now, she was still on the verge of becoming a Sky Supreme. She'd never taken that final step. The others were not much different. None of them made any substantial progress. Some people are destined to rise above others. Brother Yi is obviously such a person. As he looked at the diviners led by Yi Zichen, Huang Yang sighed. He didn't even dare to think about leading dozens of Devas. The people in the Ascension Pool were all members of the Lower Divine Mountains Upheaval Alliance. In truth, there were a few who'd ascended from other planes as well, but they didn't know anyone on the Divine Mountains. They were in a strange environment, and Upheaval's recruitment drive had pushed them to join the Upheaval Alliance. When they saw Yi Zichen's arrival, most of the Upheaval Alliance's members were curious. The Lower Divine Mountains Upheaval Alliance was rapidly expanding, so not every member had seen Yi Zichen. Only the higher-ups could get in touch with him. They didn't know who Yi Zichen was, but they could sense that this newcomer was strong. As they watched, Yi Zichen walked up to a woman in a long dress and smiled warmly. "You're here. You're here." Their eyes met, and their gazes brimmed with tenderness and sweetness. However, at a time like this, there were always people with poor judgment who would ruin the atmosphere. "Candy." A pair of fair hands reached out, and her tone was slightly mischievous. Yi Zichen didn't even need to think to know who it was. He pulled a few bottles of pills from his spatial ring and placed them in her hands. She immediately skipped over to the Ahogue youth. "Yuzhan and Lil Lori followed you up too. He's the Minister of the Right, but he's only ascending the Divine Mountains so late." Yi Zichen turned to look at Yin Shang, whose eyes brimmed with annoyance. "Don't mind him." Last night, Yi Zichen had asked Xiao Yumei to find Inshang. He'd received a message from Zhuo. She'd informed them that they'd be ascending the next morning, and that Yi Zichen was the one who'd instructed them to do so. He couldn't let Xiao Ting notice Zhuo, nor could he let him discover their relationship. That's why he'd chosen the Northwest Divine Mountain, which was hard to contact, as well as friendly territory. They ascended. The woman in the long dress was none other than Zhuo. You're one of our 4 lucky stars, and the minister of the right, but your cultivation is so low. How are you going to rely on him to expand your territory in the future? Said Inshang meticulously. All right, don't take it so seriously. All right, said Yi Zichen helplessly. He didn't want to argue with Inshang any further. After learning he was the minister of the left, Inshang seemed to have transformed into a different person. No matter what he did, he took it very seriously. Yi Zichen sighed, then glanced at Zhuo. I have other matters to attend to, so I can't welcome you back. From now on, you'll follow Inshang, and you'll no longer be members of the Upheaval Alliance. Rather, you'll be working for the 100 Treasures Trade Association. Your Excellency, fated star, said Inshang. Zhuo nodded, then frowned at Yi Zichen. Why is that? Inshang will explain the specifics to you later. In short, just remember that you don't know anyone from the Upheaval Alliance. All right, Zhuo nodded. In the future, I'll secretly arrange for the resources and manpower the 100 Treasures Trade Association needs. From now on, we'll start promoting our phones and all of our products. I hope that when I return, I'll be able to see the social profiles of the leaders of the god race. We'll have them all in our hands, said Yi Zichen. No problem. In response to Zhuo's solemnity, Yi Zichen sighed, hugged her tightly, and kissed her on the forehead. I'm sorry. You've only just ascended the Divine Mountains, yet I'm already giving you such a heavy responsibility. With that, Yi Zichen looked away. Inshang. Yes, sir, said Inshang. Take Zhuo and the others to Thousand Flower City. Yi Zichen narrowed his eyes, then smiled at the great sage. Great sage, it's about time we set off. Are you ready? Chapter 1478. The Yao race was led by the Eastern monarch Tai, and below him were the 4 monarchs. The 4 monarchs ruled over the Yao race's 4 kingdoms. For tens of thousands of years, they had never interfered with each other, supporting the Yao race as a whole. The Northern Kingdom. This was a rather special kingdom of the Yao race. The Yao race in this kingdom were generally born humans. They couldn't transform into Yao bodies, but they had pure Yao aura and bloodline in their bodies. It was said that in the early years, the people of the Northern Kingdom liked to marry humans. As time passed, the people of this kingdom became more and more like humans. Now, it was almost completely a human colony. Even now, there were still many humans in the god race who would marry the people of the Northern Kingdom. Cerulean Wave City was a city under the Northern Kingdom. Its strength couldn't be considered at the peak of the Northern Kingdom, only in the middle. There were tens of millions of Yao race and Yao race in the city. And yet, there was such a family in this city. In a courtyard covered with purple fragrant grass, a beautiful woman wearing a purple and white striped dress was half kneeling in the middle of the purple fragrant grass. Her purple and white striped dress blended well with the purple fragrant grass, and from a distance it didn't look out of place. Her expression was calm, and her eyes were motionless as she gently touched the purple fragrant grass. How many times have you been caught running away? A youth in blue and white armor leaned against a wooden pillar outside the grass garden. His white hair had a strand of black hair that reached the corner of his left eye. He silently looked at the woman in the grass garden and whispered, but didn't get a response. Are you throwing a tantrum at your big brother? No. Only now did the woman turn back and look at the youth indifferently. She shrugged and said, I'm just thinking about how to be more discreet next time. Although I've been caught these past few times, I've been able to run longer each time. Next time, I'll definitely be able to make it impossible for you to find me. It's my turn. The youth sighed and said, Don't think about it. Why? The woman tilted her head in confusion. 3 days from now is the day of your marriage with the son of Violet Yin City's city lord. You ought to be clearly aware of what this marriage means to our clan. The young man said in a low voice, Now that you've been captured, the clan elders will definitely keep a close eye on you. It'll be very difficult for you to leave the clan before you get married. Big brother, can't you help me? The woman asked again. It was clearly this young man who had captured her, but now she actually wanted this young man to help her. Hearing these words, 3 black lines flashed across the young man's face, and he said with a steely expression, "You're right. What do you think? Ever since I was young, you've always doted on me the most. Since you know that this is a marriage alliance, I don't want to be with that so-called city lord's son. I already have someone in mind. Can't you help me?" The woman stared at the young man with her bright eyes. The young man's tone became sluggish as he looked at the hope in his most beloved sister's eyes. "I can't, even though I know you're sacrificed by the marriage. But for the sake of the entire clan, no matter how much I dote on you, I must support the clan elder's decision. Then forget it. It's better to rely on myself than others. I'll think of a way to slip away myself." There was not the slightest hint of disappointment in the woman's eyes. She shrugged nonchalantly, then turned back to look at the perfectly round, violet-fragrant grass with a light smile. "I already said that you can't run. I'll stay here for the next few days to keep an eye on you. Do you think you can slip away from me?" said the young man. "As long as you put down the water slightly, I'll be able to run away," said the woman. "But you must know that that's impossible," said the young man. "Then I'll just run after we get married. The result will be the same." The woman once again shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. Silence. In this silence, there was only the sound of a cool breeze passing through the grass, accompanied by a delicate fragrance. "I somewhat regret bringing you to the lower realms to play back then." The young man's eyes flashed sharply. "If I hadn't brought you to the lower realms, you wouldn't have met that monkey. If you hadn't met him, you wouldn't have become like this. Unfortunately, there's no ifs. I just met him." The woman's tone was frivolous, and a blissful smile shone on her face. This might be the arrangement of the heavens. I met him in the vast sea of people. I'm truly blessed." As she spoke, the woman rested her chin on her hands. Her eyes twinkled like little stars as she smiled in infatuation. This expression caused the young man's expression to turn increasingly ugly. All of this was his mistake from thousands of years ago. At that time, his younger sister had just broken through to the supremacy stage. As her elder brother, he knew how hard his younger sister had worked in order to break through, so he wanted to bring her to relax. Among the countless choices of the lower realms, he chose the most wrong one, and also caused his younger sister to meet the most wrong person. He had originally thought that by bringing her back to the clan, as time passed, their feelings would slowly fade away. Unexpectedly, after thousands of years of separation, it didn't cause their feelings to fade away. Instead, that person became more and more perfect and mythical in his younger sister's mind. Until a few days ago, that monkey from the lower realms actually came looking for them, and his younger sister even found out about this. From then on, things got out of hand. "Zixia, stop fooling around." The young man couldn't help but shout out her name. "You were born in the upper realms. That wild monkey is just a mountain king in the lower realms. How can he be worthy of you? Now that the clan is in trouble, marrying the son of the city governor is the best choice for the clan. How can he compare with the son of the city governor? The clan is in trouble. Why am I the one to marry him?" Suddenly, Zixia's aura changed. She stared at the young man fiercely. "Don't slander Joker. He's not a wild monkey. One day, he'll come to marry me on a 7-colored auspicious cloud. He told me this himself. He came to see me a few days ago. He's here to fulfill his promise. But I've already forced him to retreat. Thousands of years have passed, but he's still so weak and useless. Besides, you're going to marry the son of the city governor in 3 days. This wedding is a big event for the whole northern kingdom. What can that wild monkey do?" The young man said disdainfully. "I'll say it again. He's not a wild monkey. He's Joker." As soon as he finished speaking, the fierceness on Zixia's face faded away. Her eyes were filled with a slight smile. "I believe in him. He'll show up on the day of the wedding. Heroes always fall from the sky like gods at the most critical moment. You want him to kidnap the bride? Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?" "I'm not insane. I'm idealistic." Chapter 1479. 1,000 miles of ice, 10,000 miles of drifting snow. The northern kingdom was surrounded by an endless chain of frozen mountain ranges. However, upon entering the northern kingdom's hinterland, it was filled with bird song and fragrant flowers. The ancient flagstone street was like a city of the Protoss. Demon peddlers were hawking their wares on the streets, and there were also merchants who had left the city to hunt for treasures. Yi Zichen wore the straw hat he'd just bought from a Yao peddler. Yao used aureus, and a hand-knitted straw hat only cost 1 aureus. The man selling the straw hats was an old man who'd married a Yao. In order to take care of his business, Yi Zichen had bought quite a few straw hats. He didn't look pitiful at all. Based on the old man's aura, he was at least a sky supreme. Although his cultivation wasn't high, given his age, he shouldn't have reached such a level. She was so pitiful. The straw hats were truly exquisite, so Yi Zichen wanted to buy a few as gifts. The Northern Kingdom is quite special. Yi Zichen couldn't help but smile as he looked at the endless stream of people on the streets. Despite the ambiguous relationship between the three races, this place was still filled with harmony and happiness. It could be seen from the eyes of these pedestrians that the happiness level of their country was very high. The wife of the king of the Northern Kingdom is rumored to be a human, and he has always had a good impression of humans. He has always been committed to the peaceful coexistence of humans and demons, so much so that the people of the Northern Kingdom are like this. The people here are very happy to become partners with human experts. This can be seen by looking at the passers-by. What the great sage said was true. Divine race experts could be seen everywhere on the streets. Not only did this place not discriminate against outsiders, but it was also very friendly to those from the divine race. Many of the celestial race experts could also see the partners of the demon race. From the expressions of those couples, it was obvious that they were very happy. For them to be able to do this at this time, it was already a world apart from the other demon race countries. This is a good place. If there's a chance, I'd like to get to know the king of the Northern Kingdom. Yi Zichen nodded and chuckled, then arched his brows at the great sage. How does it feel to revisit an old place? The great sage by Yi Zichen's side was stunned, but he quickly regained his composure. Old son, don't know what you were talking about. Still pretending? Yang Jian told me that the last time you came back, you went to the Northern Kingdom. Zixia Fairy is here. I don't believe what Ol Yang said about you, laughed Yi Zichen. His words are like farts, the great sage cursed. As expected, Yi Zichen winked and smiled. Since Fairy Zixia still kept her chastity to you, why did you leave without a word? This time, do you want me to help you snatch sister-in-law to the Protoss? That's our territory. Even if sister-in-law's family is powerful, they can't do anything to me. The great sage said nothing. Yi Zichen leaned over and asked mysteriously, do you need it? Say something. If I want to die, old son would have done a long time ago. The Zixia clan isn't considered a big clan here. At the mention of Fairy Zixia, the great sage's expression darkened. Don't worry about our business. I know what I'm doing. All right. Yi Zichen nodded and smiled. If you need anything, just say the word. The great sage nodded and changed the subject. Right? Didn't you say you had important business to take care of in the Northern Kingdom? Why are you still in the mood to stroll around? Work and rest must strike a balance. Since I'm here, I might as well take a look. Yi Zichen looked up and saw a nearby restaurant. With the mindset of a tourist, he arched his brows. Let's go in and have a drink. The Yao servants in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda always say the Yao's wine is great, especially the rose wine of the Northern Kingdom. Let's go in and have a taste. Proper business. Come on, that's all. The great sage couldn't dissuade Yi Zichen. His emotions were complicated, so he followed him inside. As soon as they entered, a tall, muscular man with a towel draped over his shoulder walked up to greet them. Come, have a seat, said the waiter as he pointed at a table by the window. The waiter pointed at a seat by the window. Yi Zichen nodded and walked over, while the great sage kept his head down. Before Yi Zichen could sit down, the waiter glared at the great sage. What are you doing here? Oh, isn't this the young master who just returned? He's here to take a friend to taste our rose wine, but don't say I'm being a busybody. This time, you can't take all the rose wine. The great sage's face turned green. Yi Zichen glanced at him with a smile, then turned to the waiter and said, "Just give us 2 jugs of rose wine. Just give us 2 jars of rose wine, and give us some of your signature dishes." "All right," the waiter yelled as he walked to the kitchen. The atmosphere was somewhat strange. What kind of restaurant is this? The tables haven't even been wiped clean. "Easy, let's go," said the great sage. In truth, the tables were so clean they could be used as mirrors. Yi Zichen understood that the great sage was deliberately picking on them. "We have rose wine here. Let's not drink here. Every restaurant in the Northern Kingdom has rose wine. It's the same no matter where we go," said the great sage. "Sir, you're wrong to say that." At that moment, the waiter walked over with 2 jugs of rose wine in his hands. "It's true that every restaurant in the Northern Kingdom has rose wine, but only our restaurant sells it well. Do you know why? It's because our rose wine tastes better than everyone else's." "That's right. If you want to drink rose wine, you have to come to the House of Rose," chimed in the other customers. Yi Zichen's smile grew even wider. The great sage's eyes flashed with golden light, startling everyone in the restaurant. He took the 2 jugs of rose wine from the waiter's hands, then glared at him and urged him to hurry up and leave. Just now, the great sage had released the aura of an emperor-level ruler. The waiter was but a mere Earth Supreme. How could he possibly withstand it? He gulped, then fled in panic. Is it good to scare people like that? Yi Zichen reached over and grabbed a jug of rose wine, then tilted his head back and took a sip. "It's pretty good. Yi Zi, I think we should focus on proper business. You were in such a hurry when you got here, but now you're here sightseeing? That's not good." To be honest, Yi Zichen had known the great sage for so long, but this was the first time he'd seen him like this. His expression was frantic, and his emotions were tense. What's more, the waiter had said that the great sage had reserved all the rose wine. It seemed that when Yang Jian and the great sage had gone to find Fairy Zixia, there were many things he didn't know. Chapter 1480. Gods were wise, but not strong. Yao were the exact opposite. As a result, in the eyes of the gods, Yao were barbarians. When it came to food, the gods were especially prejudiced against Yao. They said their food tasted like wax. But now, Yi Zichen couldn't disagree. Perhaps it had to do with the culture of the North, but at the very least, the Rose House's signature dishes were worthy of praise. The table was full of delicacies, but the great sage didn't touch a single bite. He didn't even take a few sips of rose brew. Yi Zichen was enjoying his meal. When he heard this, he arched his brows, lifted his bowl, and took another sip of rose brew. When he saw the great sage hesitate, he silently lowered his head. Yi Zichen didn't dare say he could guess what the great sage was thinking, but he was pretty close. Food is the most important thing to the people. We've been traveling for so long without even a drop of water. Now that we're in a northern city, we can at least rest and replenish our supplies. When Yi Zichen said that, the great sage didn't know how to argue. Don't overthink things. I'm not trying to hide anything from you. The tavern has always been the easiest and fastest way to get information. There are all sorts of people here, so if we stay here, we might get some unexpected information. What else do you need? Didn't the Hermit Emperor explain things to you before coming here? Asked the great sage. You're right, Yi Zichen said. Yi Zichen glared at him in surprise, then nodded. The Hermit Emperor really didn't explain things too clearly. He just gave me a general direction, then told me I'd find out once I got to the north. When he heard that, the great sage couldn't help but frown. Then why did you come to the north? Shoo, this isn't the place to talk about that. The great sage glanced at the customers in the tavern, but could only nod and drop the subject. However, whenever he sat in the tavern, he felt uneasy. Take your time tasting. I'm going out for a stroll. Without further ado, the great sage got up and left. Before he could take more than a few steps, he suddenly stopped. Yi Zichen couldn't help but freeze as well. Every customer in the tavern froze for a few breaths of time. What a powerful pressure. Yi Zichen squinted his eyes and looked out the window. At that moment, a fleet of cars passed by the restaurant, causing the pedestrians and vendors to subconsciously move to the side of the road. The entire convoy was made up of scarlet flame horses, leaving a long trail of flaming footprints on the entire street. Red ribbons were tied around the carriages, and there were musicians beating gongs and drums around the carriages. It was a very festive scene. Is the demon race's wedding ceremony so old-fashioned? After getting a rough idea of the situation, Yizichin couldn't help but purse his lips into a smile. They even have a guard of honor? But just because they have a few peak diviners or rulers, they're a bit too intimidating. It was obviously a wedding procession, but the Scarlet Flame Horse was rampaging through the streets. Most of the pedestrians and peddlers were chased to the side of the street, and they looked very miserable. There were also many peddlers who did not evacuate in time, and the spirit herbs on their stalls were trampled to pieces by the wedding procession. All of you scram. The wedding procession glared at them angrily. The Scarlet Flame Horse, which was clearly saddled, seemed to have broken free of its reins. It galloped down the street, leaving behind long, flaming footprints. The pedestrians scrambled out of the way, but at that moment, a child fell to the ground. The Scarlet Flame Horse was as fast as a half-step diviner. The child was only a human immortal, so he was about to be trampled. Whoosh! A silver long sword pierced through the air, and the blade of the sword was embedded into the ground, making buzzing sounds. The Scarlet Flame Horse whinnied in fright. The entire wedding procession came to a halt. "Little friend, are you all right?" Yizichin, who'd just been in the restaurant, appeared in front of the child. He smiled and patted him on the head. At the same time, a woman ran over in a panic. "Little you," the woman called the child's name. After confirming that the child was unharmed, she turned to Yizichin and thanked him gratefully. "Hurry up and thank our benefactor," said the woman to the child. "Thank you, benefactor." The child bowed to Yizichin in his childish voice. Yizichin couldn't help but chuckle. "No worries. You seem to be a member of the god race, right? What a coincidence, so am I." Yizichin glanced at the confused child. "Hurry up and take him away. In the future, you have to be more careful with children." Tears of gratitude streamed down her face as she led the child away. Yizichin twisted his neck and pulled the silver longsword from the ground. He glanced indifferently at the Scarlet Flame Horse procession, but said nothing. He'd suddenly appeared here from the restaurant in order to save the life of the child with the blood of the god race. As for everything else, this wasn't the god race's territory, so he couldn't be bothered to care. Just as he was about to leave, someone from the wedding procession shouted angrily, "Halt!" Yizichin glanced over indifferently, then saw the young man walk towards him angrily. Not long later, Yizichin recognized him. He was the one who had driven the extremely aggressive Scarlet Flame Horse. The youth wore embroidered robes, and Yizichin could faintly make out the fluctuations of a formation. He was obviously a young master. As he roared, several people followed him. Judging from their auras, the person who'd made him feel slightly pressured wasn't among them. "What?" asked Yizichin calmly. "You dare ask what? Do you know whose wedding procession you're blocking?" said the youth arrogantly. "I don't know, and I'm too lazy to know." Yizichin shrugged. "If you're going to blame me for what happened just now, then I really feel wronged. Just now, I stepped in to protect you. If I hadn't intervened, your Scarlet Flame Horse would have trampled that child to death. You should be thanking me. You should be thanking me. Why do I feel like you're here to denounce me? Help me block a calamity." The young man laughed out loud. "Do you know who I am? Do you know that you've delayed my big brother's wedding procession? Then hurry up and leave. What are you just standing there for?" Yizichin stepped aside. "Leave?" Laozi's precious Scarlet Flame Horse was startled. "Do you think it's over just like that?" said the youth. Hearing that, Yizichin was stunned, then couldn't help but be speechless. "Seriously? We're in the same world, the same second generation. Are you rich young masters all so overbearing? Then you're talking about compensation with me now, and not caring about your big brother's wedding procession?" Yizichin quickly admitted defeat when he saw the young master's expression turn dark. Fine. Don't be angry. Compensation. It's just compensation. Brothers, don't get angry. But before that, can you let me see your Scarlet Flame Horse? Who knows if it's a hybrid or not?" "Lord, don't be angry." Yizichin smiled coyly. "This Scarlet Flame Horse is rather expensive. I definitely won't be willing to pay for it. Don't you think so? I'll go and inspect it. Hego. Disdain flashed across the youth's eyes. As he watched Yizichin walk towards the scarlet flame horse, he muttered, "You're trying to be a hero with someone else, but you don't know how much you're worth." Hearing that, Yizichin didn't get angry. He merely walked in front of the scarlet flame horse with a chuckle and took a closer look. "It really is a scarlet flame horse." "Naturally," the young man said arrogantly. "Since you know it's a scarlet flame horse, then compensate. I can pay for it, but you said your horse was frightened. How do you calculate the compensation for psychological damage?" "That's no good. There's no way to give a fair price." Yizichin shook his head with a smile. "So you're saying that you don't want to compensate?" The young man's gaze turned cold. "If you don't want to compensate, then you have to think about it properly." With that, the people behind the young man walked out. Yizichin hurriedly reached out his hand. "Come on, let's go." Yizichin quickly reached out his hand. I don't. Isn't it just compensation? We have money. I'm just saying, without a proper department to judge the mental damage fee, who should pay more or less? I don't like to take advantage of others. But clearly, you can't go find a professional to judge it with me. You're in a hurry to give it to your big brother, right? Isn't it? What exactly do you want?" The young man asked. "I just want to be fair." Yizichin squinted his eyes and smiled. Then gently patted the scarlet flame horse. Chapter 1481. The scarlet flame horse fell to the ground. No blood flowed out of its mouth and nose, but the flames beneath its feet and on its head had already dimmed. It was clearly dead. Yizichin looked at the youth with a smile. The people on the street all opened their eyes wide. To be able to use a scarlet flame horse to escort the bride, he definitely had a powerful background. However, Yizichin had killed the scarlet flame horse right in front of everyone. When the flames on the scarlet flame horse were completely extinguished, the youth's expression was so dark that it seemed like it was about to drip water. The people on the street all knew that this matter definitely wasn't going to end peacefully. The mother and son duo that Yizichin had saved stopped by the side of the street and secretly worried for their benefactor. Yizichin acted as if he didn't notice the youth's change in mood. His eyes were filled with a warm smile as he rubbed his ring. "How much did you buy this scarlet flame horse for? Tell me a number, and I'll give it to you right now." "You're seeking death." As the youth roared, the thugs behind him instantly blocked Yizichin's path of retreat. "What are you doing? Didn't you want compensation? It's not like I won't compensate you. Why did you call these people over? Are they going to beat me up?" Yizichin shrunk his neck. "You really are refusing a toast only to drink a forfeit. You killed the scarlet flame horse of our city, Lord's Manor. If we just compensate and let this go, then where is the face of the city Lord's Manor?" said the youth sinisterly. "Oh." Yizichin seemed to understand. "So it's not just about compensation. There's also a matter of face? That makes things much easier." The youth frowned. Instantly, Yizichin's smile vanished, and a silver longsword appeared in his hand. His aura surged outwards like waves. All of a sudden, the pupils of the people on the street, as well as the thugs blocking Yizichin's path of retreat, and the youth constricted. "I blocked a calamity for you, yet you keep causing trouble for me. Shouldn't I settle the matter of face with you? Huh?" The shockwave suddenly burst out, and the groom and his thugs were all sent flying by the shockwave. At that moment, several figures leapt out of the carriages in the middle of the procession and landed beside the youth. Little before they could speak, a streak of golden light suddenly appeared beside Yizichin. It was the great sage. The great sage had only subtly released his aura before withdrawing it back into his body. However, even though it was just a fleeting movement, it was still seen through by the others. They forcefully swallowed the rest of their words. "Friend, we are from the City Lord Mansion of Violet Glass City. All of this might be a misunderstanding." A middle-aged man walked out of the group. Yizichin glanced at him indifferently and immediately knew that the pressure he felt at the very beginning was released by this middle-aged man. As he spoke, the middle-aged man also released his aura. "Ruler." The corners of Yizichin's lips curled up. He understood that the middle-aged man was subtly trying to tell him that he was a ruler. If they fought, it wouldn't benefit either of them. However, Yi Zichen knew full well that although he was a ruler, he'd only just entered. Great sage, it was an overlord tier. Of course, Yi Zichen didn't want to cause trouble. He had an important purpose for coming here, so there was no need for him to seek unnecessary trouble. Purple Jade City Lord Mansion. It sounded like a deterrent. Yi Zichen retracted his aura. When a middle-aged man sensed this, he let out a long sigh of relief. Their thoughts were the same as Yi Zichen's. They didn't want to cause trouble either. They were here to escort the bride. I also think this is a misunderstanding, but your young master brought up the issue of face, so I decided to pay attention to my own face as well. Our young master is inexperienced, so please, don't say that, interrupted Yi Zichen coldly. You should be thanking me. Escorting the bride is a joyous occasion, but just now, your young master nearly ruined your joyous occasion. I only didn't cause your scarlet horse to bleed out of respect for you. Understand? Understand. The middle-aged man nodded. Since you all think this is a misunderstanding, let's drop the matter. Don't delay your wedding. With that, Yi Zichen put his silver sword away, then walked back to the restaurant with the great sage without so much as a backward glance. The middle-aged man smiled as he watched them leave, then sighed and glanced at the troublemaker. He shook his head and called for the procession to continue onward. Sirs, you're back. When they returned to the restaurant, they saw a waiter standing by the door. When he saw Yi Zichen and the great sage return, the waiter beamed with delight and greeted them warmly. Are you worried we'd run off without paying? Laughed Yi Zichen. We're not that kind of people. Look at what you're saying. How could I possibly think that? The waiter beamed. Given your temperament, you're definitely not that kind of person. Even if you don't return, it's just that the procession missed you and you forgot to pay the bill. You're quite good at talking. Then why were you waiting at the door? Asked Yi Zichen. I'm just worried about the two of you. That was someone from Violet Yin City's City Lord's Mansion. I was truly afraid that the two of you would have a conflict with them. That's why I've been waiting at the entrance, said the waiter. The waiter's words were flawless. No one could find fault with them. Yi Zichen returned to his table, sat down, and turned to the waiter. Just now, you said they were from Purple Jade City's City Lord's Manor. You know them too? How could I not? Purple Jade City is our neighboring city. Quite a few of the House of Rose's customers come from there, said the waiter. Purple Jade City is one of the 16 major cities in the Northern Kingdom. Forget me, even if you asked anyone on the street, they'd probably know about the City Lord's Manor. And here I thought you were going to say that Purple Jade City wanted to form a marriage alliance with your city. That's when you find out, laughed Yi Zichen. Our city isn't that lucky, said the waiter. Isn't it a marriage alliance with your city? Yi Zichen arched his brows. Then do you know who they're marrying? They made such a big show, and it seems they're in a hurry. Of course I know. A marriage alliance with Purple Jade City's City Lord is a big deal, said the waiter. Tell me, Yi Zichen had nothing better to do, and he'd just caused a ruckus with Purple Jade City's people. He was willing to learn more about this marriage alliance. Who knew? He might even learn something unexpected. Purple Jade City wants to form a marriage alliance with Blue Wave City's Z family. Who? Say that again. The great sage slammed the table fiercely, causing everyone in the restaurant to be shocked. However, when they saw that it was the great sage, they didn't dare say anything. The waiter was stunned into silence. After a long while, he gulped and said, Blue Wave City's Z family? This is a major event in the Northern Kingdom. The son of Purple Jade City's City Lord is marrying Zixia of Blue Wave City's Z family in 2 days. This. Chapter 1482. At the mention of Fairy Zixia, Yi Zichen froze. As far as he could remember, Fairy Zixia's final destination was the Supreme Treasure. Although the ending of that movie had been barely satisfactory, Yi Zichen's feelings for the Supreme Treasure and Fairy Zixia had long since been ingrained in his heart. That was until he met the great sage who'd removed the golden band-tightening curse and learned of Fairy Zixia's existence. Then he found out that the two of them had truly gone through a love-hate relationship, and now he heard with his own ears that Fairy Zixia was about to marry the son of Xian City's City Lord. All of a sudden, Yi Zichen felt a bit of regret. Why did I ask so nicely? If he hadn't asked, they wouldn't have known it was Zixia, and the great sage wouldn't have. Yi Zichen slammed the table, stood up, and glared at the great sage. The waiter was terrified beyond belief. He also realized that he might have said something that he shouldn't have and angered the two masters. The waiter gulped and shrunk his neck. He didn't even dare breathe too loudly. Yi Zichen rose to his feet and sighed, then glanced at the great sage. Great sage! Yi Zichen wanted to say something, but he couldn't get a single word out of his mouth. The great sage's aura surged. How could heaven and earth possibly withstand the fury of an imperial emperor? The surging spiritual pressure caused the hair of the diners in the restaurant to stand on end. Their eyes trembled as they looked at the furious great sage. The wine jugs filled with rose wine exploded under the pressure. Fine nectar flowed out of the jugs. The great sage's fury enveloped the entire city. Countless experts who were close to or had already stepped into the ruler realm instinctively rushed toward the restaurant. Despite themselves, a chill ran from the soles of their feet to the top of their skulls. In terms of strength, this city couldn't even compare to the third tier of the Northern Kingdom. In the past, diviner-level experts were extraordinary existences here. Now that the great sage was releasing spiritual pressure that was at least at the imperial emperor level, the entire city, including the city lord's manor, fell into a state of panic. The scarlet flame horse of the wedding procession hadn't even left the city yet. The young man who'd held a grudge against the great sage stared blankly at the spiritual pressure for a long while. Enveloped by this spiritual pressure, his skin felt stinging pain all over his body. At this moment, he felt as if he had fallen into a demon's lair, and he was an ant crawling under the ancient demon king. Now, do you understand why I didn't let you cause trouble for them? The only sovereign in the escort party stepped forward. With a wave of his hand, he dispelled the surging spiritual pressure and urged the escort party to leave the city as soon as possible. Only then did he speak to the young man. Just based on this spiritual pressure, I'm no match for him. If you had continued to be so stubborn, let alone me, even your father wouldn't have been able to save you. Do you understand? Even with the middle-aged man's protection, the young man's eyes flickered as if he had suffered an extreme shock. Just now, when he'd left, he'd blamed the middle-aged man and secretly hated the great sage and Yi Zichen. It was even to the extent that he'd thought of investigating their identities once he returned to Violet Yin City. When the time comes, I'll settle the score. Now he was truly afraid. The escort party left the city in a grandiose procession, but the people in the tavern were already prostrating themselves on the ground. Although the great sage's fury wasn't directed at them, being so close to an imperial emperor's wrath wasn't something mere sky supremes could withstand. Zixia's wedding had driven the great sage mad. From the golden light in his eyes, Yi Zichen could tell that he wasn't listening to him at all. When Yi Zichen saw the customer's expressions, he knit his brows and spread his divine power outwards. Given his current cultivation, he naturally couldn't completely neutralize the great sage's fury, but at the very least, he could make the people in the city feel a little better. But at this moment, the monstrous rage that made people tremble suddenly disappeared from the world. Countless diviners and rulers who'd lived in seclusion let out long sighs of relief, considering the great sage's fury just now. They'd truly been worried that the great sage would destroy the entire city in a fit of rage. When the diners in the tavern felt the pressure disappear, they all crawled up from the ground and ran out of the tavern in a panic. Most of them hadn't paid their bills yet, but the waiters didn't have the spare energy to bicker with them. They trembled as they hid in a corner of the tavern, not daring to even glance at the great sage. The pressure had vanished so abruptly that even Yi Zichen froze for a moment before retracting his divine power. He looked at the great sage, who'd already returned to his chair. The red in his eyes had long since vanished, and the anger on his face had vanished as well. Instead, he looked utterly dejected. So that's how it is. The great sage muttered dejectedly. He was angry at how abruptly this news had arrived. But now, inexplicably, he'd returned to normal. It was because he remembered what Zixia's older brother had told him when he'd gone looking for her. You mean with the son of Violet Yin City's city lord? The great sage smiled indifferently, then reached into the air and pulled out an exquisite wooden box. Yi Zichen looked at it. The instant he opened it, his pupils constricted. Inside was a long, purple and white robe made of silk. If he wasn't mistaken, this was the robe he'd worn back when he'd obtained the supreme treasure. Even after thousands of years, the robe was still perfectly preserved. The great sage's eyes reddened. He carefully touched the robe, and pure white tears welled up in his eyes. He slammed the box shut, then returned it to the void. Yi Zichen, who'd seen it all with his own eyes, wanted to say something, but the great sage stopped him. "Don't mention it. Easy, let's drink." With that, the great sage roared without so much as turning his head. "Waiter, bring out the wine." The great sage's spiritual pressure had long since crushed all the rose brew in the tavern. The waiters had no idea what to do. At that moment, Yi Zichen took out several jugs of wine he'd bought in the god realm and handed them to the great sage. The great sage said nothing. He tilted his head back and poured the wine into his mouth. He didn't need the rose brew right now. He just wanted to get drunk. One day and one night, the House of Rose didn't receive any more customers. Yi Zichen stayed by the great sage's side the entire time. Who knew how much wine he drank? Who knew how many times the great sage's tears welled up in his eyes? His heart was undoubtedly in pain. He wanted to get drunk, but he was already an emperor. Happy to get drunk. The more he drank, the more clear-headed he became. The more clear-headed he became, the more he'd remember Zixia's upcoming wedding. "Waiter!" the great sage called out. The waiter trembled as he walked over. The newcomer was the same stalwart man. He'd interacted with the great sage before, so it was only natural that the waiter would send him. "Sir, what are your orders? Is it the rose brew? We've already gotten new ones." The great sage smiled sadly and shook his head. He glanced at the waiter, whose legs were trembling uncontrollably. "When will the wedding be held in Zixia City?" Chapter 1483. No one knew what the great sage was thinking. After leaving behind enough aureus to make up for the restaurant's losses, Yi Zichen and the great sage set out for Fairy Zixia's wedding was about to take place in Xian City. The great sage said nothing along the way. Before leaving, Yi Zichen thought he wanted to steal the wedding. If he really wanted to, Yi Zichen would definitely stand firmly by his side and steal the wedding. No matter what the great sage thought, in his heart, Zixia and the supreme treasure should be together. Until they arrived in Xian City. It was obvious this was a grand occasion. From the first hour of the day, the entire city bustled with activity. Guests streamed in from all four gates. By the second hour of the day, it was like a grand banquet. The entire city lord's manor was decorated with lanterns and banners. It was bustling with noise and excitement. Guests laughed and chatted, and the wedding venue was decorated with festive red satin. The character for happy was plastered all over the manor. At the third hour of the day, the guests all took their seats, and the musicians began to play joyous music. But even now, the great sage didn't make a single move. He simply stood silently on an auspicious cloud, watching everything unfold from above. Yi Zichen had clearly found Fairy Zixia's room long ago. Yi Zichen had sensed the number of experts present. Although there were quite a few experts attending the wedding, it wasn't impossible for them to steal the wedding. He was practically prepared to contact the experts of the god realm, but the great sage showed no signs of wanting to steal the wedding. Later, he understood. The great sage had never intended to steal the wedding. He was thinking. He just watched quietly, not disturbing them in the slightest. In Zixia Fairy's room, a maid was dressing her up. Noon was the auspicious time for the wedding, and the city lord of Xian City had invited many important figures of the monster race. So her makeup must be exquisite to the extreme. There was also a young man in armor standing in the room. Wearing such an austere armor on a wedding day like this was definitely not appropriate. However, he was used to this sort of attire, so no one really minded. "My little sister really looks good when she's dressed up." The young man smiled as he looked at Zixia's reflection in the mirror and nodded repeatedly. Zixia's wedding was supposed to be attended by the elders of the clan, but due to some special circumstances, the elders of the clan were unable to make it, so he, as her elder brother, had to come and be the elder of the bride's side. Actually, there was a deeper reason for sending him here. He was the only one in the clan who could catch Zixia, who had escaped several times. Now it seemed that he was accompanying his sister to dress up, but in fact, the city lord had already taken his seat at the wedding elder's table. He stayed here to keep an eye on Zixia, in case she took this opportunity to sneak away. Against your will, Zixia, who was sitting in front of the mirror, smiled faintly and looked at the young man in the mirror. The elders of both sides have already taken their seats, yet you're still staring at me. Are you afraid that I'll take advantage of this time to run away again? Actually, I feel that you don't have to worry so much. The city lord's mansion has more spies than our family. Even if I wanted to run, I couldn't. Little sister, the young man frowned. This was the city lord's mansion. Although the people who dressed him were from the Z clan, the people outside were from the city lord's mansion. If the city lord knew about this, it would be terrible. All right, hurry up and go out. I promise you that I won't run away. I'll follow the matchmaker to get married beautifully. I definitely won't embarrass you. At this point, I don't want to run anymore. Zixia's eyes were filled with a gloomy smile. Seeing this, the young man couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. He loved Zixia dearly, ever since she was a child. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken her out to play when she became a sovereign. If it was possible, he would rather arrange a marriage for Zixia. If it wasn't for the changes in the clan and the elders' worried faces, he wouldn't have forced his sister to do something she didn't like. Before father left, he asked me to give this to you before you get married. The young man sighed and took out a small wooden box from his ring. He placed it on Zixia's dressing table. Zixia didn't even look at it. Instead, she saw the young man silently shake his head through the mirror. If you want to blame someone, blame your brother for being useless. I couldn't block the disaster in the clan by myself. I could only sacrifice you in exchange for the stability of the clan. Don't talk about this, Zixia said. That's enough. I'm leaving. The young man smiled bitterly, then turned around and instructed the maids to make sure Zixia looked beautiful. Then he walked out of the room. Once he was gone, Zixia reached into her robes and reached out with her lily-white hands. She picked up the small wooden box and opened it. Inside the box was a fragment of a key. It looked like an antique that had existed for many years. After a few glances, Zixia closed the box and put it away. When she looked at herself in the mirror, her eyes were filled with desolation. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened. He instinctively touched the item in his robes, but his gaze was fixed on Fairy Zixia's room in the city lord's manor. The great sage didn't notice Yi Zichen's strange expression, but Yi Zichen frowned as he looked at the room. Just now, he'd clearly sensed the item in his robes ripple, but it quickly disappeared. Could I have sensed it wrong? Yi Zichen couldn't help but wonder to himself. He shook his head and cast aside all distracting thoughts. However, he still glanced at the room from time to time. Right at this moment, the phone in his arms rang. Not wanting to disturb the great sage, Yi Zichen gripped his phone and walked 100 meters away. He opened his social media app and saw that it wasn't anyone who'd sent him a message. However, there was a red one on his new contact list. He hadn't seen this in a long time. He clicked on his new contact list and looked at the person who'd sent him a friend request. Then he glanced at the message. I am the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen stared blankly for several breaths of time. He repeatedly confirmed the message, then clicked on his profile picture. It really is the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen couldn't help but be shocked by Zhuomo's efficiency. This was way too fast. He'd only been in the Yao realm for a few days, yet he'd already promoted his phone to the Hermit Emperor's level? No, if it were purely for promotion, he couldn't possibly have his own social media ID. But no matter what, there was a 90% chance that the person who'd added him was the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen didn't dare hesitate. He hurriedly accepted the message. Little friend Yi, I am the Hermit Emperor. The Hermit Emperor's message popped up on the screen. Before long, this little gadget you're researching is pretty interesting. How is it? Are you in the north yet? Chapter 1484. Yi Zichen glanced at the wedding beneath his feet, then at the Hermit Emperor's message. As if he could predict the future, everything seemed to be in the plan of this god clan's living fossil senior. You're right. We're currently in the sky above Xian City's city lord's manor. After sending that message, Yi Zichen sent another. It seems that what you said to me back then was actually referring to this wedding, right? But how did you know we'd definitely be here? Before long, the Hermit Emperor sent him a message. Don't think too much about it. I didn't know you'd make it to Xian City. It was all a coincidence. Yi Zichen didn't reply, but he knew the Hermit Emperor would surely send him more. As expected, after a few breaths of time, he received several more messages. If you hadn't gone to Xian City, I would have let you go. But now, it seems that since you guys are already here, we can save a lot of trouble. Ding dong. After sending the message, a red packet suddenly appeared in his chat box. Yi Zichen clicked on it and opened it. Teleportation Talisman X1. This is my teleportation talisman. If you need it, you can crush it. Who knows, I might be able to save your lives. However, it's best not to use it if possible. I'm getting old, and traveling through space puts a lot of strain on my body. My bones can't take it. When he saw the Hermit Emperor's message, Yi Zichen's expression darkened. He'd sent me a red packet, then told me not to use it if possible. In that case, wouldn't it be fine if I didn't send it? However, from the moment the Hermit Emperor sent it, Yi Zichen sensed that this wedding wasn't as simple as it seemed. Is it dangerous? Yi Zichen scanned the city lord's manor with his divine sense. In truth, there weren't that many experts in the manor. Only a few people could threaten him and the great sage. The others were all guests. They'd come to watch the ceremony, so they most likely wouldn't attack rashly. However, Yi Zichen was certain that there was danger lurking behind this wedding. It was dangerous enough to threaten his and the great sage's safety. Otherwise, the Hermit Emperor wouldn't have gone to such great lengths to create a teleportation talisman and send it to him in red packets. This old man isn't used to your new toys, so I won't tell you about them. The Hermit Emperor sent yet another message, and then his profile picture turned gray. It looked like he'd logged off. Previously, this social media app hadn't developed the ability to turn offline profile pictures gray. Now, it seemed like the development team from the Heavenly Court had improved it again. Yi Zichen couldn't help but scratch his head when he left without explaining everything. But from this brief conversation, he had a rough idea of what was going on. There was also the undulation he felt just now. If he was not mistaken, the item he was looking for in the north would appear at this wedding. Yi Zichen's heart sank as he put his phone back into his pocket. After his conversation with the Hermit Emperor, Yi Zichen gradually began to take the wedding even more seriously. Not only the wedding venue, but the entire Xian city was also on high alert. You're back. The great sage tilted his head and glanced at Yi Zichen. When Yi Zichen heard this, he nodded. What happened? Nothing. How's the wedding going? Yi Zichen didn't mention his conversation with the Hermit Emperor to the great sage. For one, he wasn't completely sure of the situation yet. For another, he didn't want to distract the great sage. As expected, the great sage didn't ask any further questions. Instead, he looked back at the wedding venue. The guests had already returned to their seats, and rainbow-colored flower petals fell from the sky above the city lord's manor onto the long red carpet. Fairy Zixiao wore a red wedding gown and a veil over her head. She placed her hand on the matchmaker's wrist and walked gracefully towards the center of the wedding venue. The eldest son of the city lord's eldest son stood atop the wedding platform, wearing a red sash across his chest. His face was full of happiness and excitement, and his eyes had been fixed on Zixia Fairy, never moving away. How wonderful! The great sage pursed his lips and sighed. You could see the smile on his face. This was his best wishes for Fairy Zixia. However, his eyes were filled with desolation. He was sighing. The groom of this wedding wasn't him. In truth, before coming to the Yao realm, the great sage had resolved not to pay attention to any news about Zixia. Everyone was fine, and he wouldn't disturb her. However, when he found out she was about to get married, he found it hard to suppress his emotions. So he thought, let's come and take a look. Who knows, after seeing her, he might really give up on her. Little did he know, the more he watched, the more heartbroken he felt. When he heard the great sage's sigh, Yi Zichen patted him on the shoulder, then sat down beside him and watched. By now, Fairy Zixia had already followed the matchmaker to the stage. The city lord's son handed them the sash, and the two of them each took one end of the sash. Then, they slowly walked to the front of the hall. The city lord of Xian City was a stocky man named Hui Lu. He'd given his name very casually. He was the sixth child in his family, so he'd taken on this name. In truth, his sturdiness had something to do with his true form. His true form was a grizzly bear, and he was one of the few experts in the north who could transform into his ancestral form. The woman was naturally Fairy Zixia's older brother. Even now, he was still clad in his silver-white armor. Even though he'd done his best to keep his aura gentle, he still couldn't hide the killing intent emanating from his armor. The wedding's master of ceremonies spoke the same opening words and lines that had never changed since time immemorial. Under the blessings of all the guests, Fairy Zixia and the city lord's son bowed to the heavens and the earth, then to the hall, until the couple bowed to each other. The city lord's son lowered his head, but Fairy Zixia suddenly stopped. Everyone was waiting for Zixia Fairy to make her last salute, but she had yet to do so. The guests couldn't help but be stunned. The city lord of Xian City frowned, while the city lord's son looked at Fairy Zixia in confusion. At the same time, he noticed that Fairy Zixia's hand, which was holding the sash, was trembling violently. "Zixia," the city lord's son asked tentatively, "are you feeling unwell? If you aren't, then hurry up and bow. Then you can go back and rest." Fairy Zixia said nothing. The city lord's frown deepened, and he glanced at his brother several times. "Zixia," the young man shouted in a low voice, "don't mess around. Hurry up and bow. Then you can do whatever you want. Don't mess around here. Everyone here is a big shot of the north. If you make a scene, the city lord will lose face, and it won't do our family any good. Didn't you promise me that you'd be good? Are they married? I regret it." Chapter 1485. She threw down the red veil and tried to escape from the city lord's mansion. The guests were in an uproar, and the city lord's face was so ugly that it looked like it was about to drip water. Zixia's elder brother also frowned and smiled awkwardly at the city lord. Then, he stared at the Z clan members who came with Zixia from Blue Wave City. "Why aren't you stopping her?" Several Sky Supreme experts chased after her. Zixia's brother stomped down hard and clenched his right hand. Zixia, who hadn't even run a few hundred meters, was suddenly caught by an invisible force. No matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't break free. At the same time, the Z family members caught her and brought her back to the wedding platform. "It's useless even if you catch me. I don't want to get married. Even if you force me to get married today, as long as you give me a chance in the future, I'll still run. If you have the guts, keep an eye on me day and night. Don't let me get a chance." Zixia Fairy glared at him and shouted angrily. The guests who had come to watch the ceremony looked on blankly. "Zixia," the young man shouted. "Ziyan, this is what your Z family taught you." The city lord of Xian City was furious. He glared at Zixia's brother and shouted, "Is your Z family deliberately trying to humiliate me? City lord, don't be angry. Zixia is..." Before Ziyan could finish speaking, the city lord's son stepped forward and asked Zixia, "Zixia, don't be angry." "Zixia, why do you say that? Are you worried that I'll be like the other young masters and have 3 wives and 4 concubines and treat you badly? I swear that I, Hui Hua, will only marry you in this life and treat you wholeheartedly." Zixia looked back at the city lord's son. "I'm not saying you're bad, nor am I targeting you. It's just that I already have someone in my heart. He told me a long time ago that one day he would come to marry me on a 7-colored auspicious cloud. From that moment on, I gave my heart to him. I won't fall in love with anyone else." Whoosh! In an instant, the entire wedding hall was in an uproar. When Zixia said those words, it was no longer a simple matter of face. It was a direct slap to City Lord Ziyan's face. The veins on Hui Lu's arms, neck, and forehead all popped out. His eyes were bloodshot, and his aura surged. His entire person was on the verge of exploding. At the same time, in the sky above the city lord's mansion in Xian City, Fairy Zixia's words stunned Yi Zichin as well. How much courage did it take to say something like that in front of so many powerful beings on such an occasion? Her words proved how deep her feelings for the great sage were. He looked at the great sage beside him. The great sage, who was sitting on a cloud, was also trembling slightly. When he noticed Yi Zichen's gaze, he quickly looked away and secretly wiped his eyes. He was wiping away his tears, however, he still did not move. The farce at the wedding ceremony was still developing in the most unexpected direction. The city lord was furious, the city lord's son was at a loss, and Zixia Fairy was determined. At this moment, someone had to step forward and put an end to this farce. Otherwise, this wedding would become the laughingstock of the entire Yao race. Even though it was already that way. Zixia, shut up, roared Ziyun. Why should I shut up? If I like it, then I like it. If I don't like it, then I don't like it. What right do you have to force me to do something I don't like? What right do you have? I told you to shut up. With a crisp slap, Ziyun slapped Zixia across the face. He didn't hold back in the slightest. A trickle of blood leaked from the corners of Zixia's mouth. The guests froze. Even Zixia, who'd been trying to defend herself, froze for a few seconds. Then, a tragic smile spread across her face. Go ahead and hit me, even if you beat me to death. I won't get married. As soon as he'd slapped her, Ziyun somewhat regretted it. This was the first time he'd ever hit her. No matter how much trouble she'd caused in the past, the most he'd done was scold her and imprison her for a few days. But now was different. This wasn't the Z family. This was the city lord's manor in Xian City. This was a wedding ceremony attended by guests from all over the Northern Empire. Ziyun forced down the pain in her heart and suppressed her worries. Then, she forced a heart of stone and shouted angrily, "You have to get married whether you want to or not." With that, he turned to the Z family clansmen and shouted, "You have to get married whether you want to or not. Help the young miss perform the ceremony. Where are we now? You've bowed 3 times already, haven't you? Let's continue." The Z family clansmen really did grab Zixia's head and forcefully pushed her back down. Even if you force me to bow to heaven and earth, I absolutely won't fall in love with this city lord's son. My sweetheart is the supreme treasure. He'll step on a rainbow cloud to marry me. He's my real husband. Even if you force me to bow to heaven and earth now, it's useless. What are you standing around for? Let's continue, roared Ziyun. Ziyun returned to his seat in the hall and watched the wedding with an ashen expression. The city lord's son thought for a moment, then lowered his head as well. The ceremony ended. When the master of ceremonies saw this, he hurriedly said, "The ceremony is complete. Let's enter the bridal chamber." Yi Zichen could see the great sage's fists clenched, but he endured. Great sage. Up in the clouds, the great sage said nothing. He didn't even make eye contact. He just sat on the clouds and watched the wedding slowly move forward. You can't hold me down. You can't. The supreme treasure will come to marry me. Until he comes, I'll wait for him. Even though she was being held captive, Fairy Xia gnashed her teeth and roared at Ziyun. The surrounding guests shook their heads inwardly. When Xian City's city lord, Hui Lu, finished bowing, waved his right hand, and left the hall. He no longer had the face to drink with the other guests. He'd lost all face. Suddenly, the sky darkened. The great sage looked ahead, but Yi Zichen knit his brows. When he spread out his divine sense, he sensed at least a dozen rulers' auras. The guests, the departing city lord Hui Lu, Ziyun, and the others. Their expressions were solemn as they looked ahead. Under the black fog that covered the sun, a dozen or so people with sharp horns on their heads and dark purple skin slowly walked out. In front of them, there was a person wearing a black cloak walking at the very front. Demons! The guests were astonished. Hui Lu, who'd only taken a few steps, stopped and knit his brows. Friends of the demon race, why have you come to the Xian City Lord's Manor? Today is my son's wedding. It's not convenient for us to receive you. Chapter 1486. The Northern Kingdom liked to be friends with humans, but that didn't mean they were willing to live in harmony with the demons. On the contrary, the Northern Kingdom of the Yao clan was disgusted by the demons. The sudden invasion of the demons, with such a large number of experts, caused the guests to frown deeply. This was especially true for Hui Lu, the city lord of Xian City. Son of a dog was a humble title for his eldest son, but if it came from someone else's mouth, it would have a completely different meaning. In the worst-case scenario, it could be interpreted as a son of a dog. Moreover, the demons and the Northern Kingdom had always been enemies, so the city lord of Xian City couldn't think positively. Our friends from the devil race have this habit of coming uninvited. It's really troublesome. Hui Lu stopped and looked at the numerous demon experts that had landed in the wedding venue. This Hui has never had any connections with the demon race, so I don't know who the demon race friends are here for. Naturally, we don't have any contact with you, City Lord Hui. A faint chuckle appeared under the loose cloak. He then turned his head and looked at Ziyun, who had already tensed up with an indifferent smile. He smiled indifferently and said, "We are actually old friends of the Z clan. Don't you think so, young Master Ziyun?" The moment this group of demons appeared, Ziyun's heart trembled. Now that the other party said it so openly, it confirmed his suspicions. It really was them. But how did they get here so quickly? That's right, this is the first time we've met young Master Ziyun, so you might not know us. However, a few of the elders in your clan are very familiar with us. As soon as he finished speaking, the black-robed man waved his hand. The devil experts behind him immediately walked up, and then they heard the black-robed devil expert laugh. "Let young Master Yin see the gifts we brought." Bang, bang, bang. 3 tied-up elders appeared in the wedding venue, their faces covered in blood and their bodies covered in wounds. These were the 3 elders of the Z clan of Blue Wave City. From their appearance, it was obvious that they had fought with these demon experts not long ago and had even experienced inhumane treatment. Clan elders. Ziyan gnashed his teeth and roared. Xia, who was being pressed down, was also stunned for a long time. She stared fixedly at the demons in front of her. The black-robed devilish being squatted down and pulled out the cloth that had been stuffed into the mouth of one of the elders, then gently patted the unconscious elder. "Wake up. As an elder, you should at least say some congratulatory word for your junior's wedding." The elder who had been slapped in the face slowly opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he did was look at his surroundings. When he saw Xia and Ziyun in their wedding clothes, the elder's eyes instantly narrowed, and he shouted angrily, "Ziyun, Xia run, dong!" The black-robed devilish being stepped onto the elder's head and bent over with a sinister look in his eyes. "I woke you up so that you could say a congratulatory speech, not these words." He waved his hand again, and the devils beside him immediately stuffed the elder's mouth with a cloth and dragged him to the back. The guests were dumbfounded. From the beginning until now, this wedding ceremony had been playing out a horrifying plot. Xia reneging on the engagement, the arrival of the demons, and now the roar of the Z clan elder. What kind of grievances did the demons have with the Z clan? Clan elder? As Ziyun shouted angrily, the elder was knocked unconscious again and brought to the back. The black-robed devilish being also pursed his lips and smiled. I wanted him to say some congratulatory words, but it's really disappointing. It seems that I was right. That thing is indeed in the hands of the 2 of you, right? In fact, we demons are very reasonable people. If you can hand over that thing readily, we won't make things difficult for you. At the same time, he smiled indifferently at the surrounding guests. Everyone, there's no need to panic. We will definitely not hurt you. We have come here to take something from the Z clan's young master and young lady. After we take it, we will leave, and your wedding ceremony can continue. Ziyun's pursed lips had already turned white. He now completely understood. If there was no accident, the purpose of this group of people must be the wooden box. Although he did not know what was in the wooden box, since the clan elder and his father would rather die than hand it over to the demons, then this thing must not fall into the hands of the demons. "How are the other members of the Z clan?" Ziyun asked. "They are fine." The black-robed man smiled indifferently. "Your relatives are personally taken care of by our leader. No one can hurt them. However, whether they will be in danger or not, it all depends on the 2 of you, right?" Green Wave City's Z clan had fallen. This was definitely not good news for Ziyan. "City Lord Hui, now that our 2 clans are connected by marriage," Ziyun asked the city lord for help. Against such a large number of devil race experts, The only thing he could rely on was Violet Yin City. City Lord Hui, are you sure you want to get involved in this? The black-robed demon threatened. What does the Z clan's matters have to do with my city lord? Marriage. Do you think you're worthy of mentioning marriage with me in this wedding ceremony? Hui Lu coldly glared at Zi Yun. He then turned to the Xian City Lord's men and shouted, "Bring the young master back to his room. You want to use my Xian City as a spear? My Xian City will not accept this marriage." City Lord is wise, the black-robed demon said respectfully. City Lord. Zi Yun's eyes widened. Xian City was the Z clan's last hope. If they were to all, Ziyin was still begging the city lord to change his mind, but Xia bit her lips and pulled him back. Brother, why are you begging them? If the wedding doesn't count, then it doesn't count. I don't like them anyway. What's the big deal? What do you know? The only one who can save our clan now is the city lord of Ziyin City. Hurry up and plead with the city lord. Ziyin glared. Plead? Can't you see that he's just making excuses? In fact, he just doesn't want to get into trouble. So what if he's pleading? Xia said. Then what do you want? Do you want to rely on your supreme treasure? I think I know who has the thing we want. The black-robed demon smiled indifferently. His body turned into a blur, and he reached out to grab Xia. Zi Yun's pupils shrank, but at this moment, multicolored light shone in the sky, dispelling the darkness brought by the demon. A seven-colored cloud swept across the sky and landed in front of Xia. With its back facing her, it reached out and grabbed the demon expert's arm. In an instant, the entire world seemed to stop. Chapter 1487. The Yao Region. The sky flickered with multicolored light, so blinding that every Yao in the Yao region couldn't raise their heads to look. Enveloped by that brilliance, there was also a mountain-like pressure that enveloped the Huagua Mountain, the holy land of the apex race of the demon domain, the primate race. At the center of the pressure knelt a man in purple and white robes, his hands pressed against the ground. In front of him was an iron staff branded with a Rui scepter. The man knelt on the ground, sweating profusely, but he continued to face the pressure head-on, his eyes blazing with flames as he looked up at the dazzling sky. Xia, wait for me. Sooner or later, I'll marry you. I'll ride a rainbow cloud to marry you. Wait for me. His voice lingered for a long time. That day, the entire Yao region heard his earth-shattering roar. Wild Mountain Monkey, you sure know how to talk big. You're here. You really came. Recalling the scene of their separation at that time, and looking at the reassuring figure in front of her, Xia Fairy's tears flowed down uncontrollably. Back then, just as she was about to be taken back to her clan, she wept just like she did now. Wild Mountain Monkey, you sure know how to talk big. He's no Wild Mountain Monkey. He's the supreme treasure. Back then, Xia cried and tried to defend him. I believe him. My lover is a peerless hero. He'll definitely ride a rainbow cloud to marry me. Her thousands of years of waiting hadn't been in vain. He'd come. He really had come. The supreme treasure radiated a boundless heroic aura as he rode a rainbow cloud and landed in front of her. You dare hurt her? The great sage grabbed the black-robed expert's arm and looked at him coldly. His eyes flashed with golden light. He exerted force with his arm, and with a crisp cracking sound, the arm of the demon race expert was forcefully crushed. The demon race expert glared at him in pain, but before he could stretch out his other hand, the demon race expert's eyes bulged. The great sage viciously kicked him away, sending him crashing into the wall behind him. Fairy Xia, are you all right? Yi Zichen landed and asked softly. Fairy Xia glanced at him in bewilderment, then heard him explain. I'm the great sage's friend. Oh, I'm fine. Xia smiled gently and looked at the great sage's back calmly. It was just an ordinary back view, but in her eyes, she could see the light that he emitted. The guests were all stupefied. To subdue a ruler with a single move, what kind of existence was this? The furious Zi Yun was stunned as well. He stared blankly at the great sage's back. Even though he couldn't see the person's face clearly, just by looking at his back, Zi Yun was able to picture him in his heart. It's him? Back then, when he went to fetch Xia back to the clan, The great sage was only a human immortal realm great demon. At that time, he was already a sky supreme. Even the gap between an immortal king and a supreme was like a chasm, let alone a great sage of the human immortal realm. Back then, Violet Cloud had only released a tiny bit of his aura, but it was something that even celestial immortals and immortal kings would find hard to endure. But it was the wild monkey that he had looked down upon back then. He was clearly in the center of his pressure, and his limbs were already on the ground from his own pressure. However, he used his trembling arms and legs to support himself from lying on the ground. He raised his head to face the golden light, looked at him and Zixia, and said those words that made him feel ridiculous. Even when he came to see Zixia a few days ago, he also looked weak and was chased away with just a few words. Who would have imagined that it wouldn't be the city lord of Violet Yin City who would make a move at this moment? It would be this wild monkey that he'd looked down upon. With the force of a thunderbolt, he forced back a devil race expert who was already at the level of a ruler. How is this possible? Ziyin was so shocked that he couldn't speak. The rest of the people also stared blankly at this scene. Seeing that the black-robed man was pushed back, the devil race experts' auras instantly exploded. The dozen or so devil race experts in front of them were all sovereigns. He released his ruler-level domain, surrounding the entire City Lord Mansion. Aren't you going to help him? Although Zixia Fairy had not reached the celestial being realm, she could still feel the strength of those experts of the Devil Clan, and she could also sense the changes in the surroundings. She urged Yi Zichen to hurry up and help the great sage. He didn't need to worry about this. Yi Zichen merely pursed his lips into a smile and shook his head. Your supreme treasure isn't as weak as you think. You should know that the man of your dreams is a peerless hero. Domain? The great sage, who was surrounded by his domain, smiled indifferently and pointed at the group of devil race experts. Boom! Turbulent waves of energy howled like a hurricane, blowing the entire wedding venue into shambles. The guests in the wedding hall all stared wide-eyed at the furious great sage. Many of them even recognized him. It's him. He was the one who released that oppressive aura a few days ago. He's a great Yao. He's at least a Yao king. I wonder which clan this senior is from, but his aura. Could it be that the person that Zixia mentioned earlier is this senior? Since it's this senior, why would the Z clan want to form a marriage alliance with the Hui clan? Just this senior alone is worth more than 10 Xian City Lord Manors. I know, right? Judging from his aura, he's at least a great Yao king. The guests were in an uproar. Even Xian City's city lord, Hui Lu, felt pressured by this aura. It's him. Others in the manor recognized the great sage. He was the ruler-level expert the city lord had dispatched to the House of Rose. I never would have guessed he was a great Yao king. It's a good thing we didn't get into trouble that day. The most shocked of them all was Ziyun, a great Yao king. How could his cultivation have risen so quickly? When they first met, he was just a human immortal. At the time, she was a sky supreme. Now, he was just about to break through to the diviner level, but he'd already such a small domain. What's the point of showing off in front of me? As the great sage muttered disdainfully, the great sage devoured all of the demonic ruler's domains. The great sage's wrath enveloped all of the demon experts. Who dares harm her? You. The great sage reached out and pointed at the demons. All of them trembled in fear and didn't dare look him in the eye. Zixia Fairy, who was protected at the back, smiled more and more brightly. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at the great sage's back. Her eyes curved like crescent moons. She was very proud and very happy. The person she loved was truly a peerless hero. So cool. Zixia Fairy rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. Looking at the purple and white robe he was wearing, she recalled all the bits and pieces of their past. In the end, she suddenly recalled what she'd been so sure of. Chapter 1488. A single man could hold the pass against 10,000 enemies. The dozen or so rulers of the demon race were intimidated by the great sage, and they didn't dare act rashly. They gathered together and stared solemnly at the great sage. Within his domain, they felt powerless. The situation gradually came to a stalemate. The demons didn't dare act rashly, and the great sage didn't act rashly either. The other guests had long since retreated 100 meters into the sky, watching the great sage face off against the demons. This is the spirit of a great Yao. The people in the sky couldn't help but sigh. Violet Yin City was a large city in the Northern Kingdom. However, the Northern Kingdom was a bit weaker than the four nations, and rulers were already incredible existences in Violet Yin City. In fact, there were no more than 30 rulers in the entire city. Now that the demons had sent a dozen rulers to cause trouble, everyone had to avoid them. From Hui Lu's performance, it was clear that even though he was the lord of Violet Yin City, he wasn't willing to offend a dozen rulers. He'd chosen to retreat. But the great sage, he'd single-handedly intimidated the rulers. His unparalleled heroism caused the guests' blood to boil. An ordinary ruler's domain is only a few meters long, but look at this senior's domain. It covers the entire city lord's mansion. Even at this level, he's probably on par with the Northern Kingdom's king. Looks like these devil race are doomed. The surrounding guests nodded in agreement. Although the demons' cultivation levels weren't low, they've been unlucky to run into a great sage who was at least a sovereign emperor. Even in the upper three realms, sovereigns were as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. Running into one could only mean that the demons were unlucky. Friend, this is a matter between us demons and the Z family. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business. You're a great Yao, and we'll give you the respect you deserve, but that doesn't mean we're afraid of you. Faced with a stalemate, one of the demons began to berate the great sage. The great sage's eyes narrowed into slits. Light shone from his domain, and he snorted. The demon expert who'd spoken earlier immediately felt all the divine power in his body dissipate. He felt as if a heavy hammer had smashed into his chest. His internal organs were shaken, and in an instant, his face turned deathly pale. A mouthful of purple blood sprayed from his mouth. Who are you threatening? Only then did the great sage speak indifferently. The other experts of the demon race looked on with stern expressions. Perhaps they really thought too highly of themselves. Standing in front of them was a great demon king. Even if the demon god of the demon race were here, he would have to be careful. Strength was confidence, a threat. In the first place, the other party wouldn't even put them in his eyes. The demon sovereigns carefully avoided the golden light in the great sage's eyes. At the same time, the great sage glanced at them coolly, then turned back to Zixia. When he faced Zixia, his coldness and overbearingness instantly vanished into thin air. What replaced? It was a heart full of tenderness. Her eyes were as gentle as water, and there were emotions, excitement, and guilt. Are you all right? The great sage's voice sank as he gazed at Fairy Zixia, who was smiling like a flower, tears streaming down her face. Of course I'm fine. With you here, how could anything happen to me? You're my hero. You'll always protect me, won't you? Fairy Zixia's eyes filled with tears of happiness. She wanted to laugh, but her tears flowed uncontrollably. As she laughed, the smile on Zixia Fairy's face suddenly disappeared. You're finally here. Do you know how long I've waited for you? The great sage's heart ached as he looked at the weeping Zixia. Of course he knew. After all these years, he and Fairy Zixia's feelings were practically the same. He carefully wiped away the tears at the corners of Zixia Fairy's eyes. At this time, Zixia Fairy smiled through her tears. Fortunately, you didn't make me wait for nothing. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. You really are a hero of the world. I'm so happy. Ahem. At that moment, a light cough broke the tenderness between the great sage and Zixia. When he turned around, he saw Ziyun, dressed in armor, walking over at some point. When his eyes met the great sage's, he couldn't help but look embarrassed. Brother, Fairy Zixia said, biting her lip. Her elder brother had always looked down on the great sage. She was a little worried that her brother would say something hurtful again. She didn't know that Ziyun just shook his head with an embarrassed smile. I misjudged you. The great sage's eyes widened. He was indeed the hot-tempered type, but when it came to Fairy Zixia's relatives, he didn't want to force them to yield. He wanted to gain their true approval, especially Ziyun. Not long ago, when he met Ziyun, he couldn't say a single word because of his sarcasm. Now, Joker, right? I, Ziyun, am here to sincerely apologize to you. I was biased against you before, and my words may have hurt you. I hope you can forgive me. Ziyun bent his waist 90 degrees. Zixia, who saw this scene, was shocked. In her mind, her brother had always been domineering, but this wedding had shown her a different version of Ziyun. He'd begged the city lord of Ziyun City, and now he was apologizing to the great sage. All of this was for her. Her gaze slowly shifted towards the group of demons. She already understood Ziyun's difficulties. How can I accept such a great gift? Seeing Ziyun bow, the great sage panicked. No matter how high his cultivation level was, in front of Ziyun, he was just her brother-in-law. He hurriedly reached out to help his brother-in-law up, but Ziyun bowed deeply and didn't move. I don't blame you. Get up. No, I have one more request, said Ziyun. Just say it, said the great sage. Please save the Z family. Ziyun gnashed his teeth. When the great sage heard this, he looked at the demon sovereigns and thought back to what he'd seen in the clouds. He immediately understood. All right, get up. Even if you hadn't begged me, I wouldn't have left you to your own devices. Before the great sage could even take out his Rui Jingu Bang, all of a sudden, a surge of demon chi appeared in the void. Everyone instantly looked up into the void and saw a young man standing in the void. On either side of him were two people who looked like attendants. When the demons at the wedding saw him, they knelt on both knees and prostrated themselves on the ground. Holy Lord. Chapter 1489. Judging from the devout attitude of these devil race sovereigns, as well as the way they addressed him, it was obvious that this young man had an extraordinary status. They'd all assumed the great sage had the absolute advantage. Who would have guessed something like this would happen? They couldn't sense any aura from a youth's body, but the two people behind him felt just like the great sage, especially after what he'd just said. Only now did the guests and the city lord's manor truly notice Yi Zichen's presence. The great sage was simply too dazzling. His strength as a great Yao made it impossible for the guests to look away. Now, the person the demon experts called Holy Lord was speaking directly to him. It seemed this youth they'd overlooked this entire time was no ordinary person. You again? You're really haunting me, Guli. Now that he'd been called out, Yi Zichen decided he might as well step forward and snorted at Guli, who'd already landed. If you put it like that, I'll feel a bit uncomfortable. Guli narrowed his eyes and laughed. You're haunting me. I wanted to tell you that no matter where I go, I'll always run into you. In truth, when I think about it, we're just too fated. Fate always arranges for us to run into each other. Think about it. Given our statuses, there's nothing strange about it, is there? Guli cracked his neck, then seemed to think of something else. Right, I almost forgot to congratulate you. You've broadened your horizons, haven't you? What does that have to do with you? Yi Zichen's expression was the same as ever, but his eyes flashed with cold light. Our relationship wasn't so good that we could chat. From the looks of it, these devils must have been sent over. Of course, Guli made no attempt to explain himself. To him, there was nothing to explain. I came here to take something. If I'm not mistaken, you came for it as well, right? Yi Zichen smiled coldly, but said nothing. Guli's lips twitched, and his gaze suddenly turned cold. Yi Zichen, I've always found our competition to be quite interesting. I'm actually quite happy to have an opponent like you on the road of life. At the very least, you don't make me feel lonely or bored. But you just had to touch something you shouldn't have. Truly, I'm furious. What does that have to do with me? Snorted Yi Zichen. Looks like you know. Instantly, Gu Li's expression contorted hideously. Just you wait. I'll snatch her back from you sooner or later. If you don't agree with me, don't say that I don't give you face. I'll leave these old guys of the Z family to you. But if you want the others to live, I'll give you one night to make arrangements. Let's meet in Blue Wave City at this time tomorrow. Of course, if you want to see a bunch of corpses. If you want to live, bring me what I want. Go. With a wave of his hand, Gu Li and the other demon sovereigns vanished from the sky. The aura of the devil race gradually dissipated into the horizon. Ziyun, Zixia, and the great sage ran to the side of the clan elders, and only relaxed when they were sure that they were still alive. The great sage pointed at the city lord of Xian City, and Hui Lu hurriedly walked over. Although he was the lord of the city, he was definitely not a match for a greater demon king in terms of strength. Clear some rooms for us to rest in. There are always rooms available. This way, please. Hui Lu felt aggrieved. This wedding was between Zixia and his son, but the great sage was Zixia's former lover. However, the great sage used to be Zixia's sweetheart. Now that the wedding had failed and she had lost face, he still had to arrange rooms for these people. But no matter how aggrieved he felt, he could only keep it in his heart. Did he dare say it? He didn't dare. A greater demon king was an existence comparable to the ruler of a country. If the great sage really wanted to destroy the city lord's manor, it wouldn't be impossible. What's more, there was a youth by his side whose cultivation he couldn't see through. He didn't dare say for sure how high his cultivation was, but he was certain that his identity was extraordinary. Hui Lu had no choice but to grit his teeth and swallow his pride. Yi Zi, let's go. Little did they know, Yi Zichen remained in place, mulling over Gu Li's words. Her. What on earth was he referring to? It wasn't until the great sage called out to him that he came to his senses and left with them. The wedding came to an end in a farce. The other guests either settled in or left under the arrangements of the city lord's manor's clansmen. However, a masked man in the crowd glanced at Yi Zichen several times. Yi Zichen, Greenwave City, leaving behind a low voice. That person directly left the city lord's mansion and disappeared without a trace. You don't have to worry. I got this pill from Yi. It's a divine grade healing pill. Their injuries are already very serious. If we use the pill to nourish them, it won't be a big problem. In the room, the great sage looked at the elders lying on the bed and said to Zixia and Ziyun. The Violet Jade City governor was very discerning, and he didn't separate them when arranging the rooms, and he chose a suite with multiple rooms for them. Ziyun cautiously probed the necks of the clan elders several times before turning his head back with a frown. Why did you let them go just like that? That young man seems to be a person of high status and power. If we can capture him and use him to save our Z family, wouldn't it be better? The great sage fell silent. Yi Zichen couldn't help but frown. Do you know what you're saying? For Zixia's sake, the great sage could tolerate Ziyun over and over again, but that didn't mean Yi Zichen would indulge him. From the very beginning, he had always disliked Ziyun. The great sage and I came here for Zixia's sake. We helped your Z family out of respect for Fairy Zixia. Don't think too highly of yourself. You're just a diviner. Who do you think you can boss around? For the sake of the clan, you forced Fairy Zixia to marry the son of the city lord. For the sake of the clan, you agreed to let the great sage and Fairy Zixia be together. It looks like you're doing this for the sake of the clan, but don't you think you're being too selfish? You want to save your clan. We can understand that, and we support that. I just hope you use your brain before you speak. Here, no one owes you anything. Watch your words. Yi Zichen glared at Ziyun and roared. Stop, Guli. If even you can tell he's an extraordinary person, do you think we can't? If he's an extraordinary person, doesn't he have experts protecting him? Do you know what level the two people behind him are? I'll tell you straight away. Demon god level. Do you understand? At the mention of demon gods, Ziyun was so shocked he couldn't speak. Chapter 1490. In the Yao Northern Kingdom, the Z family of Bayubo City was actually just a small family clan. It was hard for them to make it into the top 10 clans in the entire city. Whether it was in terms of resources or treasures, they were far inferior to the other clans. Yi Zichen couldn't think of anything the Z family could possibly have that was worth Gu Li's personal attention. The only thing he could think of was the fragment of the God Emperor's key. In truth, that was Yi Zichen's goal in coming to the Northern Kingdom. From Gu Li's words, he could confirm that this was indeed what he wanted. When he heard that, Ziyun's expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. While he was lost in thought, Fairy Zixia flipped her hand, and an exquisite wooden box appeared in her palm. That's what they want, right? Zixia pursed her lips as she dragged the box. She'd been kept in the dark this entire time, so she didn't know much about the situation between the Z family and the demons. So long as she thought about it carefully, she could guess what the box contained. When Ziyin handed it to her, she'd opened it and confirmed that it didn't contain any of the family heirlooms of her ancestors, nor was it something she'd taken a liking to. They'd given it to her for safekeeping before the wedding and hadn't given her any explanation. At the time, she didn't understand, but the instant the demons arrived, she heard the clan elders' roars and her older brother's desperate pleas to City Lord Ziyin. Now she understood. What the devil race wanted was this wooden box. They didn't want it to fall into the hands of the devil race. That's why they'd given it to Xia, the daughter-in-law of the city lord of Xian City, who they believed could keep it safe. Ziyin, when she saw the box, Ziyin couldn't help but frown. Both Yizichin and the great sage looked at the box. The great sage was curious as to what was inside. Why had the demons gone to such lengths to steal it? In truth, Yizichin already had his suspicions. However, if this really did contain the fragment of the God Emperor's key, could this little box really sever the outside world's perception of it? "Can I open it and take a look?" asked Yizichin. Of course. Xia placed the box in Yizichin's hands without hesitation. Ziyin wanted to dissuade her, but in the end, he clenched his fists and swallowed his words. The wooden box was very light, as if it weighed nothing in his hand. Yizichin looked at the wooden box, took a few deep breaths, then used his divine power to form another arm. It emerged from his left sleeve and gently lifted the lid. At the same time, a ripple of energy appeared in Yizichin's arms. When he took out the item from his bosom, he saw a key fragment flickering with a dazzling light. It complemented the key fragment in the wooden box. It really did contain the key fragment to the God Emperor tomb. Back then, when the fragments of the God Emperor's tomb key were scattered all over the gods, fiendish demons, there would be some resonance between the fragments. The closer the distance, the stronger the resonance. Who would have thought that this small wooden box would be able to sever the connection between the fragments? He held the two fragments in his hands at the same time. Judging from the broken lines between the two, they couldn't be pieced together. Other than them, there were at least 3 other key fragments wandering around. Xia and Ziyin also looked at this scene in astonishment. They had both opened this wooden box before. There was only a very ordinary key fragment inside, and it had never shone like this before. When they looked at the key fragment Yizichin had taken out, it seemed to be the same key fragment as the one in the wooden box. Suddenly, Ziyun's brows darkened. He had a bad premonition. He reached out and snatched the Z family's key fragment. Yizichin was still trying to figure out just how many pieces the key fragment was in. When he saw this, he froze in fright. He glanced at Ziyun and saw that he'd already put the fragment away. The light in the room disappeared. It's just an ordinary key fragment. There's no need for you to investigate so deeply, is there? A dark look flashed across Ziyun's eyes as he held the wooden box. Yizichin rubbed his fingers, then smiled. All right, let's go. That's true. Big brother. Xia couldn't understand Ziyun's actions. What are you doing? Silly little sister. Can't you tell? Your supreme treasure and his friend are actually here for this key fragment as well. And to think I thought the supreme treasure was a good person. I never would have guessed he had a purpose for saving us. How unexpected, snorted Ziyun. The supreme treasure isn't that sort of person, explained Xia. Shouldn't you ask him yourself? Ask him if he really wants this key fragment or not. Roared Ziyun. Xia wanted to argue, but Yizichin chuckled and reached out to stop her. He nodded and said, You're right. I can't deny that. I really do want this key fragment. Ziyun hadn't anticipated that he'd actually dared say it. An instant later, he sneered and narrowed his eyes. If you dare say it, I'll respect you for being a man and not playing dirty tricks. The great sage and Xia were stunned. Even the great sage hadn't known Yizichin was here for this. But let me say something on behalf of the great sage. He had no idea he was here. I didn't ask him to save you. He really did want to save you. In truth, before I came here, I never knew your Z family had this key fragment, nor did I know it was on you. Everything was just a coincidence, said Yizichin. Huh. The point is, you want this key fragment, don't you? Said Ziyun. Of course. I already said I want it, said Yi Zichen solemnly. I want it, but I won't harm your family like the demons did. However, if I say it out loud, it won't be too friendly. I'll use your family to threaten you, just like they did. Ziyun was stunned. He didn't quite understand what he meant. The Z family's clansmen were in the demon's hands. What could he use to threaten them? Could it be the elder lying in the room? Or perhaps Zi Xia? Ziyun dragged Zi Xia behind him, and the aura of the celestial being realm inside him leaked out. Although he knew his cultivation was nothing in front of Yi Zichen and the great sage, he was the elder brother and their only fighting force. He had to step forward. You're quite cautious. Yi Zichen smiled and shook his head, then glanced at Fairy Zi Xia, who'd been dragged behind Ziyun in confusion. Even if it's for the sake of the great sage, I won't use Fairy Zi Xia as a hostage. Besides, I'll have too few bargaining chips. I'll use your entire family to threaten you. Chapter 1491. Ziyun froze. He never would have guessed that Yi Zichen would threaten him with this as a starting point. The Z family of Bibo City had fallen, and the demons had taken control of the entire clan. Given Ziyun's cultivation and abilities, trying to save his clansmen from the demons was a pipe dream. Even if the clan elders woke up and recovered from their injuries, it was impossible. The marriage alliance with the city lord was over. It seemed his only hope was Yi Zichen and the others. Despicable, said Ziyun through clenched teeth as he clenched the key fragment. If saying this makes you feel any better, then go ahead and say it. Yi Zichen's lips curved into a smile. I'm no saint. I don't have to pity the world's pitiful people. Indeed, perhaps my methods were a bit despicable. You don't know Gu Li's methods, but after clashing with him several times, I do. If I save your clansmen, I'll most likely die tomorrow. I'm risking my own life. I'll use your entire clan's lives in exchange for a calamity you can't protect. Isn't that a good deal? Yi Zichen shrugged, his eyes flashing with a not-quite-decent smile. I have my reasons for wanting this God Emperor tomb fragment no matter what. It doesn't matter if you call me despicable or take advantage of others. If you give it to me, your clan won't die. If you don't blame me for being heartless. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. Zi Xia bit her lip and stood between the two of them, unsure of what to do. Ziyun furrowed his brows and glanced at the great sage. Supreme treasure, don't you like my little sister? Are you really going to just stand by and watch the Z family die? For a long while, the great sage lowered his eyes and said nothing. Zi Xia, did you see that? This is the supreme treasure you like. In order to get what he wants, he's even willing to use our clansmen as hostages. Did you see his cold, emotionless face? You've wasted thousands of years waiting for him, snorted Ziyun. I don't think they're doing anything wrong. In the face of Ziyun's sarcasm, Zi Xia smiled indifferently and said, It's true that our Z family doesn't have the ability to protect this key fragment. An innocent man will get into trouble because of his wealth. We've known this since we were young. Since this fragment is a disaster for the Z family, why not? Why don't you give it away? Even you? What about me, tell me? Zi Xia sneered at Ziyun and said, Elder brother, you've been making irresponsible remarks like a lunatic. You're the one who asked for the Joker, and you're also the one who criticized the Joker. You're the one who didn't let me be with Joker, and you're the one who did. You treat me like a baby. Become what? What would the supreme treasure be? Are the two of us your tools to protect our race? What do you know? Ziyun rebuked angrily. I don't know anything, and I'm too lazy to understand. But now, the problem is right in front of you. You can either give the fragment to Joker's friends, and they can go and save our clansmen. Otherwise, you can keep your fragment, and we'll burn incense for our clansmen next year. It's that simple, Zi Xia said. Suddenly, Ziyun's face stiffened. He rubbed his fingers and fell in a deep thought. Although Yi Zichen's expression was cold, he was actually a bit nervous. He was worried that Ziyun would reject him resolutely and not give him the key fragment. The great sage's silence just now meant he was on his side, but Yi Zichen believed. Given his relationship with Zi Xia, he absolutely couldn't just leave the Z family to their fate. Yi Zichen couldn't possibly be so cold as to ignore them. Even if it was out of respect for Zixia and the great sage, he had to help. He had his reasons for wanting the fragment of the God Emperor's tomb. He had to hold on to it no matter what. In order to hide his nervousness, Yi Zichen crossed his legs and stared ahead coldly. He instinctively pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. Time ticked by. The room was so quiet they could hear each other's breathing clearly, but in Yi Zichen's heart, it felt like a pendulum clock was ticking. As time passed, his emotions grew more and more agitated. He extinguished a few of his cigarettes. How can you guarantee the survival of the Z family? After a long silence, Ziyan looked up at Yi Zichen. I can't guarantee anything. Yi Zichen stamped out his cigarette, then rose to his feet. I'm not sure about Gu Li's arrangements, and I've never had the upper hand against him. Forgive me, but I can't answer your question. When I said I'd guarantee the survival of your clansmen, I meant not all of them. I'll do everything in my power to keep your parents, elders, and brothers alive. But I can't guarantee the survival of your clan's guests, maids, and guards. I can even save them. Yi Zichen looked Ziyun straight in the eye. That might sound unfair to them, but the world isn't fair to begin with. On the battlefield, only generals, nobles, and nobles are protected. I've never heard of anyone protecting a soldier. That's the advantage their status gives them, said Ziyan. The same is true for the Z family, so I can only do my best to save the most important people. As for those I can't save, all I can do is mourn for them. But you can't blame me for that. At the end of the day, their calamity was brought upon them by your Z family, not me. I'm just trading with you. Then why don't I just hand it over to the demons? Asked Ziyan. You could give it to him, and the demons might really just take it and leave. Guli might still keep his word, since that's the case. But like I said, I'm determined to get this key fragment. Yi Zichen changed the topic. If you give it to him, I'll take it. If I end up harming any of your Z family members, don't blame me. Or rather, Guli, who's always been at odds with me, will protect you and find a place for you to live. Gods or demons? That's your choice. Ziyan fell silent once more. After a while, he looked up and nodded. All right, I agree. But you have to wait until the Z family is safe before I give it to you. That's for the best. Let's have a pleasant cooperation. Back in Greenwave City, the Z family Gu Li's expression hadn't been particularly good since returning to Greenwave City from Ziyan City. Yi Zichen, he sat in his room, his brows furrowed in fury. He narrowed his eyes as he looked into the mirror at his hideous face. His two companions were also in the room. Give the order. He gnashed his teeth and relayed his plan. After they left, Guli rose from his chair and looked out the window at the hazy moonlight. You're always going against me. You even want to steal and loot from me. Chapter 1492. Time flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was the next morning. Ziyan's wedding was a complete mess, turning the city lord's manor into the laughingstock of the Yao race. Even so, the city lord's manor's Hui family still treated the Z family with great hospitality. All of this was because of the great sage and great Yao king. Never mind Hui Lu. Even if the clan's ancestors left seclusion, they'd have to bow down to him. Since Gu Li's appointed time was almost up, Yi Zichen and the others didn't linger at Ziyan's manor. Presumably, Hui Lu had been waiting for them to leave. When they said they were about to leave, he pretended to flatter them, but he didn't actually try to make them stay. In front of the eastern city gates, the great sage and fairy Zixiao were dressed in matching outfits of purple and white. From start to finish, fairy Zixiao's gaze was fixed on the great sage. She rested her chin on her hands, and her eyes shone brightly, as if she were a fangirl. Ziyan was clad in his armor. As usual, they stood in the sky 5 kilometers outside the city. Yi Zichen was there too, dressed in brand new black robes. However, he stood elsewhere. From time to time, his phone beeped with a notification. After 100 breaths of time, he put his phone away and approached the others. How did it go? The great sage narrowed his eyes. He knew Yi Zichen was contacting the gods just now. We can't count on them to come. We don't have enough time, said Yi Zichen. This was inevitable. They'd traveled from Heavenly God City to the Yao realm. Thanks to the transportation formations, they'd arrived quickly. However, There were no transportation formations in the Yao realm's northern empire. Going from the south to the north took them an entire day. Furthermore, they'd agreed to meet Gu Li in Bayubo City. Even if they'd contacted the gods last night, they still wouldn't have enough time. They can only meet us in the Yao realm's southern empire. Once we rescue the Z family, we can rush there as fast as we can. However, we'll have to deal with them on our own while we're in the north. That was the conclusion Yi Zichen had reached after contacting Xiao Yumei and the others. They'd only just arrived in the southern empire. Even if they rushed there as fast as they could, at best, they'd only reach the border between the north and south. And this was only the best-case scenario. The southern nation was not as hospitable as the northern nation. They favor the god race. Among the 4 nations of the monster race, the southern nation had always been a warmonger and had a particularly tense relationship with the god race. They had to be especially careful in the southern kingdom, and they couldn't send too many people here. If too many ruler rank experts entered the southern kingdom, it would be easy for the southern kingdom to see it as a sign of war. They might even use this as an excuse to attack the god race's territory. That's enough. The great sage nodded. He'd long since prepared for the worst-case scenario. Now that Yi Zichen told him that the gods were waiting at the border between the north and south, this was already good news for him. Right now, the most difficult thing was actually to rescue them. As long as they could rescue them, escaping would not be as difficult as they had imagined. Let's set off immediately. We need to arrive before noon. There's still some distance between Cerulean Wave City and Xian City, said the great sage. Gu Li must have set up an inescapable net there, waiting for us to go over. Yi Zichen frowned deeply, then glanced at Fairy Zixia and Ziyun. Last night, I already explained the details of the plan. When the time comes, all you need to do is act according to the plan. As for the Z family's safety, leave it to me and the great sage to handle. All right. Fairy Zixia smiled and nodded. She didn't look worried in the slightest. Ever since the great sage appeared by her side, she'd been all smiles. In contrast to Fairy Zixia's liveliness, Ziyun was clearly much more reserved. In response to Yi Zichen's repeated warnings, he simply nodded solemnly and clenched his fists. You also have to prepare for the worst. Yi Zichen looked at Ziyun. Ziyun nodded. He knew very well what Yi Zichen meant. Gu Li might have already wiped out the entire Z family. Given the demon's past behavior, it wasn't impossible for them to do something like that. Don't forget our agreement. You don't need to worry about that, said Ziyun. Since I promised to give it to you later, I naturally won't regret it. Besides, I don't have the right to regret it, do I? Said Ziyun. That would be for the best. Yi Zichen nodded. Let's head out. Greenwave City. In order to obtain the key fragment to the God Emperor's tomb, Gu Li didn't just control the Z family. He also took over control of the entire city. The City Lord's manor was still in operation, but in truth, Gu Li was the one giving the orders behind the scenes. What time is it? Gu Li sat in a rattan chair in the City Lord's manor. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and faced the sun. It's almost noon, said the man on his left. Did the people at the City Lord's manor cause any trouble? No, said the man on his right. The person on the right said, the City Lord is now in our hands, and the people under him are also spineless. The City Lord's mansion is now a puppet of our subordinates, and the city's defenses have all been replaced by our people. Moreover, they're all from the new demon race, and their auras are similar to that of the demon race. There's no difference. Please, release my wife and daughter. Only now did he notice that a white-haired old man knelt beneath an ancient tree in front of the chair. He was none other than the current City Lord of Greenwave City. It seems you care a lot about your wife, said Gu Li with an indifferent smile. But that's right. At your age, you've married such a beautiful wife. It's normal for you to care a little. Don't worry too much. So long as he's obedient, your wife and daughter will naturally return to his side, safe and sound. Whatever you want, I'll listen to you. Can you? No. Gu Li's gaze froze. If you don't want her lovely wife and daughter to die, you'd better shut up. With that, the City Lord didn't dare utter another word. Gu Li's eyes remained closed as he basked in the warmth of the sun. He sat facing the sunlight so that he could judge the time better. In truth, he was already somewhat impatient. Ever since he'd returned to Greenwave City last night, he'd been looking forward to this moment. In order to welcome Yi Zichen, he'd laid out an inescapable net. "Don't ever disappoint me. You have to come." As he muttered to himself, a sinister smile tugged at Gu Li's lips. A cool breeze blew past. Rustling sounds could be heard from the forest on both sides of the house. Time was slowly creeping closer to noon. "We're here." Suddenly, Gu Li opened his eyes and cracked his neck. "Let's go see if they're here or not." Chapter 1493. Please. We're clearly from the same family, yet someone invited us into the clan. What a novel experience. Following behind Gu Li's entourage, Ziyun snorted with a fierce glint in his eyes. When he heard this, the guide didn't respond at all. He simply led the way meticulously. From time to time, he stopped to wait for Ziyun and Ziyun, as if afraid they'd get lost in their own home. That's pretty good. It's a new experience, after all. Zixia was still as happy-go-lucky as ever. She really did think this was her first time here. She couldn't help but look around. She couldn't be more familiar with this place. She knew exactly where to sneak out without her clansmen noticing. The cobblestone path twisted and turned. As they passed through Jadeite Forest, Ziyun and Zixia didn't see a single member of the Z family. They didn't even see the most ordinary of maids or guards. The only thing they could sense was the demonic aura enveloping the entire residence. "Holy Master, we brought them." Gu Li's back was to Ziyun and Zixia. When he heard that they'd brought them, a dazzling smile surfaced on his sinister face. He instantly turned around and spread his arms. "Yi Zichen, you." His voice came to an abrupt halt. When Gu Li turned around and saw who'd arrived, he froze, his smile gradually fading. Only Zixia and Ziyun had arrived. As for the great sage and Yi Zichen, they hadn't come with them. Gu Li looked them over carefully, then sat down in a chair he'd prepared beforehand. "Of course it's us. Who else did you think it was?" Ziyun's gaze was cold. "Did you think it was Yi Zichen and that wild monkey? I actually hoped he'd come, but he was worried you'd set up an ambush here. He said he'd wait for his subordinates to arrive first." "Zixia and I don't have time to wait, nor can we." "Is that so?" Gu Li smiled disdainfully, then hooked his finger at the person next to him. That person immediately leaned in, and the two of them conversed in low voices. Gradually, Gu Li's eyes filled with disappointment. What a pity. This sigh wasn't directed at Zixia or Ziyun, but rather at himself. According to that person, the great sage and Yi Zichen really hadn't come together. Hundreds of kilometers away from Blue Wave City, Zixia and Ziyin entered their monitoring range, but apart from the two of them, they did not detect the presence of anyone else. He was very disappointed. They'd clearly laid an inescapable net for Yi Zichen to fall into, but this time, he'd chosen to retreat. As far as Gu Li knew, Yi Zichen wasn't such a coward. It seemed that his temperament had changed after so many years. In other words, after he opened his star eye, the Protoss Almighty who were on his side could not allow him to act as he did before. What a disappointment. Gu Li couldn't help but sigh as he leaned back in his chair, but he quickly composed himself. Although he was sad that Yi Zichen hadn't come, he still had to properly welcome Zixia and Ziyun. Naturally, they came here for their clansmen. "Did you bring what I asked for?" "Of course." Ziyun reached into his pocket and took out the wooden box. When he opened it slightly, Gu Li's eyes lit up. There was no mistaking it. This box contained the fragment of the God Emperor's tomb he wanted. However, before long, Ziyun closed the box, and Gu Li looked away. "I really have to thank Yi Zichen for his fake righteousness. I can't believe he didn't just take it from you. Since you brought what I want, give it to me." Gu Li extended his hand. But at this moment, Ziyun took the wooden box back. Gu Li couldn't help but knit his brows and tap the table. "What do you mean?" "I want to make sure my clansmen are safe," said Ziyun solemnly. "Are you trying to negotiate with me?" A sinister glint flashed through Gu Li's eyes. Then he snorted. "I admire your courage, but don't you think your actions are a bit rash?" Instantly, Ziyun felt the surrounding temperature plummet, and he felt as if a venomous snake were staring at him. Cold energy seeped into his body from the ground, but Ziyun's expression was resolute. He glared back at Gu Li, refusing to budge an inch. "Of course I know. Given my and Ziyun's cultivation, we have no right to negotiate with you. I'm also well aware that you're strong enough to take it from me effortlessly. Since I've thought of all this and still dared to come, I naturally have my reasons. His oppressive might bore down on Ziyun. Even though the pressure was intense, Ziyun's face paled. His legs trembled violently, and he broke out in a cold sweat. However, he gnashed his teeth and clutched the wooden box tightly. He glared viciously at Guli. Fine, I agree to your demands. If even Yizichin can refrain from forcefully taking it from you, I naturally won't stoop so low. He waved his hand gently, and the oppressive might vanished without a trace. Ziyun took a few deep breaths. Just now, that oppressive might had nearly suffocated him. If he was already in such a state, then Ziyun. He glanced at Fairy Zixia. Her face was flushed with a sickly red, and her chest heaved violently. I said before that all I want is the key fragment to the God Emperor's tomb. So long as you give it to me, I naturally won't harm your clansmen. Of course, if you're still worried, there's no harm in taking you in for a look. Guli cracked his neck, then rose to his feet. Ziyun and Zixia followed closely behind him. After passing through a winding path, they arrived at the back mountain of the Z family estate. Before they even entered the courtyard, Ziyun sensed the auras of dozens of diviner-level demon experts. They were all experts assigned to watch over the Z family clansmen. Let's go in and take a look. Not a single one of them is missing. They might all be injured, but at least they're still alive. Guli chuckled and pointed inside. Ziyun and Zixia walked in side by side. The courtyard was filled with heavily injured Z family clansmen. Quite a few of them were on the verge of death, hanging on by a thread. Crack! Ziyun clenched his fists. Guli smiled calmly. I didn't lie to you, did I? I didn't lie to you, did I? They're all still alive, even though they've suffered some injuries. After you give me the key fragment of the tomb of the God Emperor, I can heal their injuries, and I can even give your Z family resources that will allow you to become a first-rate force. No need, said Ziyun. A low voice suddenly rang out from Ziyun's direction. However, it was not Ziyun who had spoken. Chapter 1494. Before coming here, Yizichin had foreseen that Guli would set up an inescapable net to deal with him. It would be very difficult for him and the great sage to defend against Guli's subordinates. Even if the two of them managed to break through the encirclement, the Z family members would still be affected. That was why Yizichin had come up with this plan. He'd used the 72 transformations to create the box containing the key fragment. Then, he told Ziyun and Zixia to go ahead and repeat the lines they'd rehearsed countless times before heading out. He had Guli lead them to the Z family clansmen. Earlier, Yizichin hadn't dared say he'd save the entire Z family clansmen because he could only use this method once. He couldn't be sure whether or not Guli would lock them up separately. To his surprise, Guli had placed them all in the same courtyard for the sake of keeping an eye on them. I knew you'd come. When he saw Yizichin appear out of nowhere, Guli's eyes didn't betray even a hint of surprise. On the contrary, he smiled faintly. Of course I came. Thank you for leading the way. Otherwise, it would have taken me a lot of trouble to find this place. Also, thank you for keeping them all in the same place. It saved me the trouble of looking for someone else, laughed Yizichin. I truly miscalculated. It's just that there are so many people in the Z family. Before Guli could even finish his sentence, a black pagoda suddenly appeared in the sky with a loud rumble. Did you forget? The Yao Ceiling Pagoda is in my hands. Return. Under the astonished gazes of the surrounding demons, the members of the Z clan in the courtyard flickered. In the blink of an eye, all the members of the Z clan in the courtyard disappeared. Ziyun and Zixia disappeared as well. Yizichin put them all in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Then the black pagoda returned to his hands. It really is a treasure. Even now, Guli didn't seem surprised in the slightest. I still have to thank you for coming to my trap, and even delivering all your treasures into my hands. Suddenly, Guli took a step back. Yizichin was instantly surrounded by a sea of demon experts. Hey, quite a few people, huh? Yizichin scratched his head and laughed. Are you afraid? Asked Guli. Afraid? Did we just meet? What have I not seen before? You actually think that I'm afraid? It seems like you still haven't noticed. Do you want me to remind you? Don't you feel like I'm missing someone? Gu Li, who'd been grinning from ear to ear, finally revealed a hint of surprise. Only now did he realize that the great sage, who'd always been by Yi Zichen's side, wasn't here. He knew that person's cultivation realm. At the very least, he was an imperial lord. Could it be? Great sage, I'm here. Suddenly, Yi Zichen waved behind Gu Li. Almost all the demons in the courtyard were attracted by it and looked back. However, there was no one behind them at all. Where was the great sage Yi Zichen had mentioned? When they retracted their gazes, they discovered he was gone. F***CK. I've fallen into his trap. Yi Zichen had long since lost all sense of direction. Gu Li, who hadn't sworn in ages, couldn't help but curse. Did anyone see where he went? None of the demons replied. Gu Li narrowed his eyes and looked around. He could vaguely sense the spatial fluctuations around him. Could it be that he'd mastered the Tao of space as well? Chase him. Even if he's comprehended the Tao of space, there's no way he can travel such a long distance in such a short amount of time. He can't leave Bayubo City. The surrounding demons chased after him. Gu Li, who'd remained in the courtyard, couldn't help but mutter to himself. What was wrong with him recently? It was clearly an easy trick to see through, yet he'd jumped in without the slightest suspicion. And Lu, after learning that Yi Zichen had taken Lu, he realized that he couldn't remain as calm and composed as before. He desperately wanted to kill the person who'd taken Lu, but little did he know, his plans were riddled with loopholes. Gu Li shook his hands, narrowed his eyes, and chased after him. Not long after Gu Li left, a pebble beneath his feet suddenly leaped up into the sky, then returned to Yi Zichen's appearance. The Tao of space? Even scratching the surface of such a grand Tao required a tremendous amount of time and experience. Even if he was a peerless, monstrous genius, he'd only been in the God realm for a short time. He didn't have the time to study such things. It was still the 72 transformations. While Gu Li and the other demon experts panicked, he took advantage of that moment to transform into a pebble. Damn it, that scared me to death. Yi Zichen leaned against the wall and took a few deep breaths. From time to time, he stuck his head out to see what was going on. He absolutely didn't dare use his divine sense. If he did, the Z family's demon experts would definitely sense it. There were so many devil experts in the Z family, so they would definitely sense it. At that time, they would follow the fluctuations and come over. Even if he had wings, he wouldn't be able to escape. There's no time to waste. Yi Zichen calmed himself down slightly, then turned into a moth, which flapped its wings as it leisurely left the Z family estate. Hey, just how many people did Gu Li bring with him? Yi Zichen flew for a while, then landed somewhere to survey his surroundings. He was less than 1,000 miles away, but he sensed at least 10 diviner-level demons searching for him. Whenever someone swept past him with their divine sense, Yi Zichen would have to completely erase his aura and disguise it as a moth's. It didn't seem like he'd be noticed in the short term, but switching between auras consumed too much divine power. In his moth form, he couldn't replenish himself. Besides, even if Blue Wave City was a small city, he didn't know how long it would take for a moth to slowly fly there. Just as he was pondering how to leave Green Wave City as soon as possible. It's him. Inwardly, Yi Zichen smiled, then flapped his wings and flew forward. In order to find Yi Zichen, Gu Li's subordinates had wreaked havoc in Green Wave City. Countless peddlers couldn't even find peace. Whoosh. At this time, a demon race expert landed in front of the vendor stall that was selling spirit herbs and spirit medicines. Have you seen this person before? The demon expert stretched out his hand, and a screen of water appeared in the sky. Yi Zichen's image slowly appeared on the screen. The vendor was a fatty, but he was merely an Earth Supreme. The demon expert before him was a diviner. Logically speaking, the vendor should have been terrified of a demon expert, but he actually laughed foolishly. What are you laughing at? I'm asking you if you've seen him or not. Chapter 1495. The fat vendor pointed behind the demon expert and laughed foolishly. The expert didn't suspect anything and really looked behind him. However, there was no one behind him. Before he could react, he felt a blow to the head. I said it's behind, so it's behind. Why are you so stupid? The demon expert, still dizzy from the beating, turned around and saw that the fat vendor had already transformed into Yizichin. He didn't even have time to release his divine awareness to notify the other demons. Another blow smacked him in the head. The demon expert could only point at Yizichin's blurry face, tilt his head, and fall to the ground. I knew you weren't smart. You're so easy to fool. He dragged the devil race expert to the side of the street and stripped him clean in a few moves. Not long after, from the entrance of the alley, a person who looked exactly like the previous devil race expert walked over. That's much easier now. This person was naturally Yizichin's incarnation. Leaving the city at the speed of a moth was too slow. If he'd transformed into a commoner, given Gu Li's level of caution, he wouldn't have let him leave the city. Instead, he would have investigated him thoroughly. Only if he transformed into his subordinate would he be able to use his diviner cultivation without arousing suspicion. Glancing at the demon race expert who had been stripped naked in the alleyway, he lightly crooked his finger and sent him into the Yao-subduing pagoda. There was no way he could destroy the corpse. It was best to be cautious and avoid using divine power if possible. He'd toss him into the Yao-sealing pagoda first. As for the rest, that could wait until they left the city. What a foolish old man. Yizichin couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He thought it would take some effort to deal with him. He hadn't expected it to go so smoothly. Li Ju! Li Ju! Suddenly, several shouts echoed through the sky. At first, Yizichin didn't have time to react. It wasn't until someone landed beside him that he realized Li Ju was the demon's name. So it's someone from the Jili. Yizichin muttered to himself, then averted his gaze. Transforming into Li Ju was just the beginning. This was the most important thing. He needed to use these demons to test whether or not the demon experts would see through his disguise at close range. They were getting closer and closer. Although Yizichin did his best to hide his emotions, he couldn't help but feel nervous. Li Ju, what are you waiting for? Did you find him? The two demon experts descended. These two demon experts were also in the celestial being realm, similar to Li Ju himself. I didn't find it. Come down and rest, said Yizichin. Then why aren't you looking? Do you still have time to rest? The taller demon expert said, It's fine to rest for a while. We've been searching for 4 hours. If the person the Sacred Master found was really proficient in spatial Tao techniques, he would have escaped long ago. Even if he doesn't run, he's at least at the ruler level if he can use space Tao arts. Wouldn't we be courting death if we ran into him? A devil expert said. Shut up. The taller demon race expert glared at him. If Saint Master hears this, you're dead. Let's talk among ourselves, the shorter demon expert said. It's better to be careful. You and I shouldn't waste too much time here. Even if it's just for show, we still have to get busy. Li Ju, don't rest. If the Sacred Master sees you, you'll be in for a treat. As soon as he finished speaking, the expert from the demon clan flew away. The shorter demon clan expert patted Li Ju's shoulder and flew off in another direction. As he watched the two demons leave, Yizichin couldn't help but wipe his lips and smile. The 72 transformations really was a divine technique. The two demon experts stood in front of him, yet they couldn't tell that he wasn't Li Ju, but rather Yizichin. But when he thought about it, it made sense. When he transformed into a pebble, Gu Li and so many other demons had been present, but hadn't anyone noticed him. On the way here, Yizichin had been rather worried. Would they really let him go so easily? Yizichin scratched his head, then didn't tarry any longer. He hurried to the gates of Greenwave City. On the way, the demons he encountered didn't pay him much attention. Instead, they used their divine senses to carefully search the city. An hour later, as Yizichin hurried at top speed, he could vaguely make out Greenwave City's walls. At the rate things were going, he'd be able to break free in less than 100 breaths of time. Is it really that simple? Yizichin didn't dare imagine it. Li Ju. At that moment, someone called out Yizichin's name from behind him. On the way, Yizichin heard his name repeatedly, but no one had noticed his disguise. This time, he didn't take it seriously at all. He turned around and looked back. Unexpectedly, The person rushing towards him was Gu Li, Holy Master. Yi Zichen didn't dare be negligent around an old rival like Gu Li. Yi Zichen bowed respectfully, then looked down and quietly waited for Gu Li to arrive. "Is there any news of Yi Zichen?" "Not yet," said Yi Zichen. "If there's no news, then why are you in such a hurry to leave the city?" "I thought you'd heard that Yi Zichen had left," said Gu Li. He'd actually suspected that. Yi Zichen's heart jolted. He'd been in such a hurry to leave the city that he'd forgotten about this. "I just thought that if we couldn't find him after so long, he might have already left the city. That's why I wanted to search outside," said Yi Zichen. "That's not a bad idea. It's been so long, he might really have left the city." Yi Zichen hurriedly nodded. "All right, then go out and take a look." Gu Li waved his hand with a smile. Yi Zichen nodded as if he'd just received an imperial edict. However, before he could take more than a few steps, "Wait, who was the person you told me about last night? I forgot. Can you remind me again?" Yi Zichen, who'd just turned around to leave, instantly stopped. He narrowed his eyes and looked in Gu Li's direction, only to see that Gu Li was smiling back at him. "I really nearly let you get away. You've mastered the 72 transformations quite well. Yi Zichen, I can't believe you noticed." Yi Zichen chuckled, then returned to his original appearance. His eyes were filled with regret. "I thought you'd learned the Tao of Space, but I forgot you had the 72 transformations. Yi Zichen, you're really something. You try to play me in the dark? You got guts," said Gu Li. "I almost got away," sneered Yi Zichen. "Got away? That's impossible. In truth, I've long since set up an inescapable net outside the city. Once you're outside, you'll be more likely to be exposed," said Gu Li. "Is that so?" said Yi Zichen. "Of course." Gu Li nodded. "Are you sure about how the great sage managed to get into the city?" "The great sage? Trying that trick again? That's no good, is it?" laughed Gu Li disdainfully. "It's true. If you don't believe me, turn around and take a look. That stick is about to hit you. If you don't get out of my way, I'm afraid it'll smash your skull in." Gu Li's expression changed. He reached out with his divine sense, then instantly froze. Chapter 1496. In the void, the shadow of the cudgel cut through the void, accompanied by a deafening sound of rushing wind. As the staff swept past, it was as if a primordial demonic beast had torn a hole in the sky. A pair of scarlet eyes peered out of the crack. Anyone who saw them couldn't help but feel their hair stand on end. As the demonic beast stared at him, Gu Li couldn't help but feel a chill run through his heart. Then he narrowed his eyes and took in a deep breath. Petty tricks. Gu Li didn't dare hold anything back against the great sage's staff. He knew that the monkey in front of him was an imperial lord-level expert. Moreover, this staff strike was extremely strange. A ray of starlight descended from the sky. His hands glowed with starlight. Judging from his expression, he was preparing to receive the staff with his bare hands. "Holy Master, wake up!" Just as Gu Li was concentrating, a furious roar reverberated through the sky. Instantly, Gu Li's vision cleared up. The great sage who'd unleashed the staff had already vanished from the sky. The scarlet demonic beast's eyes were gone as well, and he couldn't sense any energy fluctuations in the air. "You're a little distracted, big bro." The brick smashed into the back of Gu Li's head. Don't ever underestimate this brick. He'd obtained it after opening the 3rd floor of the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. It was a substandard divine artifact cold weapon with a stun effect. As for the great sage who'd appeared in the sky just now, that was the effect of the 2nd divine artifact, the illusionary spirit pearl. It could see through people's hearts and create the scene their opponents feared the most. Yi Zichen was certain Gu Li was afraid of the great sage, which was why he'd chosen to use these 2 divine artifacts to escape. Gu Li was so focused on his attack that he didn't notice Yi Zichen at all. The brick smacked him squarely in the back of his head. Suddenly, his vision blurred. Did you know that? This is the power of RMB player. Yi Zichen smirked and watched as the demons converged on him. Yi Zichen took out a modified smoke grenade he'd prepared earlier and threw it viciously at the ground. The surrounding area was shrouded in mist. Even divine awareness couldn't penetrate within 100 meters. "If it weren't for the fact that I'm in a hurry right now, I'd really want to stab you to death with my sword." Yizichin rolled his eyes. When he sensed that the demon experts were already within range of the clouds, he didn't dare tarry in the slightest. He pushed off the ground and charged out of the clouds. As for the demons outside the mist, eat this old sun's stick. After scaring Guli twice, the great sage finally showed his face for real. Wielding the Rui Jingu Bang, he was like a god descending to the mortal world. The demons were terrified out of their wits. When he saw Yizichin emerge from the clouds as promised, the great sage casually killed the diviner demon and waved at him. Yizi, over here. Of Gu Li's subordinates, only the two people by his side could make the great sage feel some fear. Just now, Yizichin had knocked Gu Li unconscious. The two of them were too eager to protect their master, so they'd long since entered the smoke bomb's range. To the great sage, the demons outside were nothing more than small fries. Get rid of him. It was effortless for them. This was a battle of wealth. Judging from the results, Yizichin had the absolute upper hand. I'm coming, shouted Yizichin as he rushed to the great sage's side. By now, there were practically no demons capable of fighting him in the sky above Bayubo City. You're not hurt, are you? The great sage was clad in the Monkey King's battle armor and hefted the Rui Jingu Bang. He looked very much like the great sage, heaven's equal. Speaking of which, it was strange. The heavenly palace had clearly bestowed him with this armor, but in terms of defensive power, it was far superior to most divine artifacts of the god race. There was also his Rui Jingu Bang, the divine sea-stabilizing pillar of the Eastern Sea. It was far, far stronger than most divine artifacts. It wasn't just the great sage. Even Yang Jin's Erlang lance was the same. Hey, I'm fine. Yizichin glanced at the demon expert diving into the mist, then took out the brick. My special effects divine artifacts are more than enough to give him a run for his money. Let's save the Z family clansmen. Of course, they're all in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. Then let's hurry up and leave. Have you cleared out the demons outside the city? Asked Yizichin, recalling Gu Li's earlier words. The great sage furrowed his brows, then glanced outside the city. Are there demons outside as well? I looked around a few times, but I didn't sense any demonic aura. No demonic aura? Given the great sage's cultivation, not even a demon god of the same level as him could hide his aura from him. Furthermore, the great sage had the old lord's fiery eyes of truth. He could see through all demons. The great sage hadn't come immediately, because Yizichin was worried Gu Li would set up an ambush outside the city. That was why he'd left the great sage outside to deal with the demons. Then forget it. Let's retreat. Yizichin narrowed his eyes, then chose to retreat. They couldn't stay here for long. The smoke bombs and bricks effects wouldn't last long. Once the smoke cleared and Gu Li woke up, Yizichin and the great sage would be at a disadvantage. However, Yizichin was still cautious. Gu Li wasn't the type of person to speak without thinking. Besides, Yizichin had seen demons who could disguise themselves as other races. However, at that very moment, before the two of them could move, they discovered that the surrounding space had been completely sealed off. A fierce wind howled through the air, dispersing all the smoke from the smoke bombs. Gu Li stood in the center of the smoke, his gaze clear as he smiled at the sky. There was no way the brick stun effect would disappear so quickly. Yizichin glanced to the side. Lying next to Gu Li was a man who looked exactly like him. This was most likely the one who'd actually eaten the brick. Do you think you're the only one with more divine artifacts? Don't forget, I'm the Lord of heaven and earth as well. As he spoke, the man beside Gu Li transformed into a puppet. Yizichin recognized this divine artifact. It was ranked 17th on the divine artifact rankings. A substitute puppet. By feeding it with blood essence, it could transform into the user for a short time. Through the connection between the two, the user could completely disguise themselves as the user and confuse the enemy. As for the net that trapped you, I'm sure you recognize it. It was ranked 9th on the divine artifact rankings. Inescapable net. This guy. Yizichin's gaze turned cold. He hadn't expected their fight to turn into a contest between divine artifacts. However, from the looks of it, it seemed he was slightly inferior to Gu Li. As expected, when fighting against someone as scheming as Gu Li, he couldn't afford to be careless. Actually, what I said earlier was true. At first, I really did fall for your tricks. Thank goodness, I was able to make the correct adjustments after that. What do you think? It looks like I'm the winner again. Are you sure? Yi Zichen laughed. Do you really think you've won? Chapter 1497. Although Gu Li's neck was covered with a metal rod, the neck was still the weakest point of defense. Given the great sage's strength, killing Gu Li would only take a few breaths of time. The surrounding devils were all stunned. They stared at the great sage who had appeared in the middle of them, their eyes wide open as they held their weapons. Let go of the Holy Master. Hurry up and let go of the Holy Master. The demons glared and shouted angrily. The great sage, who was holding the Jingu Bang, lifted it up and looked at the demons with a golden gleam in his eyes. All of you shut up. If today becomes the anniversary of the Holy Master's death. The great sage's eyes flashed with vicious light. He instantly suppressed the demon experts. Back off! Gu Li roared angrily at the surrounding demons. When they heard his order, they retreated over 100 meters despite their unwillingness to do so. This sudden turn of events was shocking to everyone. They couldn't understand why the great sage had appeared in their midst, much less in the form of the envoy of the left. Never mind where the envoy of the left really was. Could the great sage have learned the unshackled doppelganger? In all of the upper three realms, only the Sea Emperor of the Sea of Innocence had managed to learn the unshackled doppelganger. Was the one standing next to Yi Zichen really the unshackled doppelganger? You could say yes, but you could also say no. In truth, this great sage was transformed from monkey hair. He'd already secretly disposed of the envoy of the left by Gu Li's side. You've never disappointed me, said Gu Li. As the staff pressed against his neck, Gu Li couldn't help but nod in admiration. Just as he raised his hand, the great sage's staff pressed down hard on his shoulder. Do you want to die? When he heard that, Gu Li lowered his hand resentfully. We've been rivals for so many years. I should at least keep an eye on you, right? Neither of us wants to suffer at the other's hands, right? It's only natural for me to be cautious. Yi Zichen stood in the air, arms crossed, and laughed. Retract your inescapable net. We came back to take the Z family with us. We don't want to take your life. You don't want to, or you don't dare, laughed Gu Li. If you kill me here, my subordinates might not let you go. You can say that. Anyway, if you want to live, then stop your divine ability. Yi Zichen pointed at the divine artifact, the inescapable net, which enveloped Greenwave City. No matter how he answered, Gu Li's words struck a chord in his heart. Right now, Gu Li really couldn't be killed. If he and the great sage wanted to leave, they'd have to use Gu Li as a hostage. If he killed Gu Li, they'd lose their final bargaining chip. Given how much the demons revered Gu Li, they'd probably go crazy. If he could, how could Yi Zichen allow him to live another second? This time, he had come deep into the tiger's den to rescue Zixia Fairy and her family. The most important thing right now was to hurry up and leave. There would be many more opportunities to fight Gu Li in the future. Yi Zichen firmly believed that evil would never prevail over good. It was only a matter of time. They were said to be the two emperors chosen by the heavens. The four great auxiliary stars stood by his side. The Brahma stars took him as their leader, and even the Transcendent's outer realms viewed him favorably. Based on everything that had happened, Gu Li would never amount to much. Perhaps he could fight against him now, but evil would never prevail over good. In ancient times, the God Emperor could suppress the Demon Emperor. Even now, Yi Zichen could suppress Gu Li. Yi Zichen pointed at the inescapable net overhead. Gu Li's life was in the great sage's hands. Although the great sage was certain that Yi Zichen wouldn't dare kill him, given his temperament, he should be able to see the situation clearly. If they dragged things out, Yi Zichen would be on the winning side. You made a clever move, laughed Gu Li. A clever move? Are you sure this isn't a killing move? Asked Yi Zichen. Could it be that you've got a trump card up your sleeve? What do you think? Yi Zichen could see Gu Li's fearless smile. Yi Zichen swore that the last thing he wanted to see was that smile. He knew that this was the last move he'd made before coming here. His trump card, the only one he had, was the teleportation talisman the Hermit Emperor had left him. He wanted to see Gu Li's expression of unwillingness. That was the only way to prove that there was nothing he could do. But now he was smiling. Yi Zichen bit his finger, then subconsciously reached out with his divine sense. His eyes, however, were indifferent. Is there any point in fighting psychological warfare now? I don't know if there's any point, but I know you're afraid. Aren't you? Said Gu Li. How can you tell? If you're not afraid, why did you bite your finger and reach out with your divine sense? Isn't that just a sign of fear? It's always better to be cautious. It's better to be safe than sorry. That's the modern realm saying, said Yi Zichen. That's right, it's the old saying. The old saying doesn't lie to me. That's why I've lived so cautiously all these years, said Gu Li. But now you're in trouble, said Yi Zichen. Who said that? Didn't I tell you already? This isn't a killing move. As soon as he finished speaking, the great sage transformed Gu Li into a puppet, just like the substitute puppet from before. The substitute puppet ranks among the top 20 auxiliary divine artifacts for two reasons. It's a substitute, but also because it is set, not just one. Gu Li's laughter rang out from a nearby alleyway. He craned his neck and walked up to the demons. When they realized that the one he'd just held was a puppet and that their holy master was still safe, they immediately surrounded the great sage. The great sage hadn't expected this at all. He knit his brows, hefted his staff, and looked around vigilantly. This brother of yours is something that I'm very afraid of. In order to lure his true body out, I've really racked my brains. Gu Li clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at Yi Zichen, his eyes brimming with amusement. Brother Yi, do you have any more tricks up your sleeve? Why don't you show them to me? Huh? Yi Zichen laughed coldly. It seems you don't have any more. Gu Li pursed his lips. Is this your final move? How disappointing. Even now, I'm at a loss as to whether or not I should show you my final move. It seems you've already lost. Is that so? Oh, it seems you still have more tricks up your sleeve? Laughed Gu Li. No, this is indeed my final move. You've won, but I'd like to see just what your final move is, said Yi Zichen. Really? I'm afraid that if I use it, you'll feel despair. Chapter 1498. Great sage? The cold blade touched his neck. Yi Zichen's eyes flashed with astonishment. He tilted his head and looked behind him. The person standing half a step away from him was still the great sage, but his eyes flashed with a vicious light. You still can't tell? Gu Li smiled and shook his head silently. Surrounded by demons, the great sage's eyes flashed. He looked up at his clone, who was holding the sharpest blade to Yi Zichen's neck. That wasn't a clone he'd created with monkey fur. To make things easier for him, the great sage had created the clone with monkey fur to create its own consciousness. That way, even if he didn't need to control it, it could complete its tasks on its own. The great sage could also pretend to be Gu Li's envoy of the left. The great sage had never considered that something would go wrong with the clone. He'd never gotten in touch with it. It wasn't until the clone had pointed his sword at Yi Zichen that he considered the possibility that Gu Li had taken control of the clone's consciousness and was trying to regain control. Only then did he realize that the person standing there was no longer the clone he'd left behind. The clone he'd created was currently in the north of Bayubo City. Yi Zichen could sense that it was on the verge of death. This wasn't the great sage. Yi Zichen understood. He'd called it the great sage just now because everything had happened so suddenly that he hadn't expected it. If the person standing next to him wasn't the great sage, then who was it? Although this was just a clone of the great sage's monkey fur, it still possessed 30% of the great sage's strength. Ordinary rulers were no match for it. Only Gu Li's two envoys could. Envoys? Yi Zichen's heart suddenly went cold. When the great sage said he'd successfully disguised himself as the envoy of the left, he'd found it strange. Although the great sage was strong, the envoy of the left was no ordinary person. According to the great sage's description, he'd dealt with him easily. It's you. Yi Zichen looked to the side. The sword-wielding great sage had assumed the appearance of the envoy of the left. After his identity was revealed, The envoy of the left didn't say anything. Or perhaps it was better to say that he was a man of few words. At the same time, Yi Zichen felt someone grab his shoulder. The ice-cold blade pressed hard against his neck, and fresh blood flowed out from his neck. Under the envoy of the left's control, Yi Zichen landed on the ground. He ignored Yi Zichen and placed his left hand on his chest. His right hand still held his sword against Yi Zichen's neck. Then he bowed slightly towards Gu Li. Emissaries. The experts surrounding the great sage were all smiles. Thank you for your hard work. Gu Li nodded towards Envoy Zhu, then walked in front of Yi Zichen. Looks like I've won this round. Hand over the key fragment, and I'll let Great Sage Sun and the members of the Z family go. You're not going to let me go? Yi Zichen smiled. Forgive me for saying this, but you can't leave. Yi Zichen took a deep look at Gu Li. From his gaze, he could sense the hatred and madness hidden deep within. There was a fire burning in his eyes. It was the fire of his heart, the fire of his anger, and a hint of jealousy. Yi Zichen could understand the first two, but never mind Gu Li looking at him. Even Yi Zichen felt a fire burning within him. It was the flames of jealousy in his eyes that he found hard to understand. What on earth was he jealous of? Was he jealous of his luck? Was he jealous of the 4 auxiliary stars by his side? Was he jealous of the help he had from so many benefactors? It didn't seem like it. Although Gu Li had always stood on the opposite side of Yi Zichen, in all fairness, Yi Zichen held him in high regard. Whether it was in terms of shrewdness or intellect, no ordinary person could compare to him. Gu Li wasn't the type to get jealous over external factors. So what on earth was he jealous of? Given the current situation, there was no time to ponder the matter of the lock. His life was in the enemy's hands. The most important thing right now was how to escape. Yi Zichen glanced at the great sage. His situation wasn't much better than Yi Zichen's. One of the 2 emissaries, the envoy of the right, was glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey. There were also a dozen or so demon rulers surrounding him. Although those rulers were nothing more than shrimp soldiers to the great sage, 2 fists were no match for 4 hands. Furthermore, he had an existence worthy of his full attention. The Hermit Emperor had given him a talisman, but he couldn't retrieve it from his phone. It seemed he had no choice but to fight to the death. Yi Zichen's gaze shifted back and forth. By now, all of Gu Li's subordinates were gathered in Bayubo City. Are you still thinking about how to escape? Laughed Gu Li. I can't just sit around and wait for death, can I? Do you really think I'll be able to survive after falling into your hands? Yi Zichen didn't even try to hide it. Of course not, said Gu Li. Seriously, can't you just tell a lie? Who knows? I might actually believe your lies. Give up resisting, obediently hand over the fragments of the God Emperor's tomb, and wait for you to spare my life, said Yi Zichen speechlessly. Gu Li couldn't help but laugh. Yi Zichen understood him, but how could he not understand Yi Zichen? There was no point in saying all this. I want to see what shocking moves you'll make in your final struggle. Then I'll definitely open your eyes. Yi Zichen's gaze darkened as he roared at the great sage. Great sage, return. The great sage was already prepared. His golden eyes flashed, and a strand of golden monkey fur returned to his neck. Instantly, the great sage wielding the Rui Jingu Bang grew 1,000 times larger. Dharma idol of heaven and earth. The 1,000-meter-tall great sage towered into the clouds, casting a huge shadow over the entire Blue Wave City. Suddenly, the great sage swung his iron staff viciously at Yi Zichen. Even the envoy of the left didn't dare take the great sage's all-out attack head-on. He instantly appeared before Gu Li, grabbed him by the shoulder, and retreated 100 meters away. Rumble. The earth caved in. His staff smashed a 100-meter-deep hole into Bayubo City. At that moment, Yi Zichen nimbly stepped into the air, his eyes flashing with fire. Fire come. Heavenly fire fell to the ground. Surging white heavenly fire rained down from the sky, turning everything within 100 kilometers into a sea of flames. Collect. As the heavenly fire descended, Yi Zichen summoned the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and sucked all of the civilians into it. Great sage. Understood. There was no need for Yi Zichen to say anything. The great sage opened his mouth, sucking in the surrounding air and the heavenly fire. Chapter 1499. Retreat. When they saw the demon experts of Bayubo City surrounded by heavenly fire, they didn't dare tarry. They sped to the edge of the city. Yi Zichen's Tao of fire of the 5 elements hadn't reached full mastery. Although ruler-level experts didn't dare rashly touch the descending heavenly fire, if they defended carefully, it would be difficult to truly harm them. The sea of fire below could only hold them for a short time. In this short period of time, they needed to tear a hole in the inescapable net. Great Sage, it's up to you. The inescapable net was ranked 9th on the list of auxiliary divine artifacts. Yi Zichen knew that, given his current diviner cultivation, breaking through it from the inside was a pipe dream. This divine artifact had trapped even Eastern Monarch Tai for the time it took to brew a cup of tea. The great sage nodded solemnly. Although he was still some distance away from Eastern Monarch Tai, with the support of his Dharma world, breaking through the net wasn't impossible. Rui, as the great sage muttered, the Rui Jingu Bang transformed into a long, sharp needle. That was inevitable. If you wanted to break through the net, breaking it with a single point was the most effective method. Break! The great sage stabbed the needle viciously into the net. As the great sage broke through, Yi Zichen didn't just stand there. Fire come. Wind come. The scorching heavenly fire fell from the void without any gap. The howling wind also turned into a tornado, pushing the heavenly fire higher and higher. The Tao of the 5 elements. Guli narrowed his eyes. He had to admit, the Tao of the 5 elements was causing him no small amount of trouble. It wasn't just him. His demon subordinates were the same. He glanced at his subordinates, trapped by the heavenly fire. The only ones capable of completely ignoring it were his 2 emissaries. Don't worry about me. Go and capture Yi Zichen. As soon as he said that, Gu Li's brows darkened. He looked up into the sky. With the support of his Dharma world, the great sage's Rui Jingu Bang had already pierced through the net. So long as he could break through it, everything else would be easy. In the blink of an eye, the great sage tore a hole in the net surrounding Bayubo City. However, the inescapable net had a self-healing effect, so the wound would not last long before it completely healed. Yi Zichen summoned more celestial fire from the sky, fanned the flames, and hurriedly followed the great sage out of the rift. He really got away. Seeing this, Guli couldn't help but shake his head and chuckle. The people outside have finished their preparations, right? Protector 3 and Protector 5 will stay 100 miles away from the city, the special envoy of the right said. Hurry up and extinguish the fire. We can't stay here for too long. Although Yi Zichen and that monkey don't have the advantage in numbers, if they really go all out, the people outside might not be able to stop them, said Guli swoosh. Above the clouds, 2 piercing sounds cut through the sky, and the clouds in the void were blown away by the strong wind brought by these 2 figures. Naturally, they were Yi Zichen and the great sage. After leaving the city, they didn't dare tarry at all. They hurried to the rendezvous point Xiao Yume had arranged. What did they say? The great sage, who was enveloping Yi Zichen in divine power, furrowed his brows and stared intently at Yi Zichen's phone. The signal's a bit shaky, so I can't send a message. When I get back, I'll have the technical department improve the signal. Although he couldn't send a message, Yi Zichen took out the talisman the Hermit Emperor had given him. No one could be sure that nothing unexpected would happen along the way. Taking out the talisman was a precaution. Son, swear that this is the most useless run I've ever had. Just wait until I've settled the Zixia clansmen in, then I'll get my revenge sooner or later. The great sage's eyes flashed with golden light as he gnashed his teeth and roared. Although there were many demons, the great sage wasn't afraid. If not for the Zixia clansmen, he would have long since told Yi Zichen to hide in the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and wait for him while he smashed the demons' heads to bits. Enough. It's already good enough that you managed to escape the city. In that situation, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his life had been hanging by a thread. Yi Zichen held off the left emissary, and the great sage was surrounded. Fortunately, Yi Zichen had the God Emperor's tomb's key fragment. Before obtaining it, Gu Li didn't dare take his life. That was why the two of them had time to privately communicate through divine sense, catching Gu Li and the others off guard. Otherwise, Yi Zichen wasn't sure if the great sage would have died, but he was probably in deep trouble. Given our current speed, if we don't. Suddenly, the great sage came to a stop. Yi Zichen extended his divine sense and sensed the auras of dozens of God race experts. Something's wrong. This was the Northern Empire. The Northern Empire was full of God race experts, which was also good. But now, so many of them had suddenly appeared, and it felt as if they'd been deliberately waiting for them to show up. Something was wrong. Yi Zichen sensed that something was wrong, but they couldn't stop now. Gu Li and the others from Cerulean Wave City would catch up at any moment. They had no time to ponder the God race experts' intentions. Ignore them. If they don't attack us, let's not touch them. The great sage nodded, enveloped Yi Zichen in divine power once more, and rushed forward. However, this time, he wasn't as impetuous as before. Instead, he moved at a relatively slow pace. Before they'd taken more than a few steps, those celestial race experts actually stopped them. Among these people, there were two experts with at least the aura of an Imperial Realm expert. What do you mean? When he saw the experts blocking their way, the great sage roared, "We're in a hurry. Take advantage of the fact that I haven't lost my temper yet and scram." There was no mistaking the aura of an Imperial Emperor. If they'd sensed the great sage's Imperial Emperor aura, they'd definitely have retreated. However, they didn't waver in the slightest. Yi Zichen and the great sage couldn't help but feel a chill run down their spines. "Brothers, I don't know if you're here for money or... Please speak clearly. We're tourists from a god race, and we're in a hurry to return to Heavenly God City. Could you please make things easier for us?" Yi Zichen cupped his hands respectfully. As he spoke, he gripped the talisman the Hermit Emperor had given him. He could vaguely sense that these people weren't gods. There's no way they'll let you go. Suddenly, a chuckle rang out in the sky. Yi Zichen and the great sage turned around and saw Gu Li rushing towards them, a sinister smile on his face. Chapter 1500. The Sea of Innocence. After the God Emperor pulled the other great emperors in charge of the Divine Mountains into their camps, they no longer tried to hide anything. They made the Northern Divine Mountains Sea of Innocence their headquarters. As for the reason, it was so simple it left everyone speechless. Because of Xuanmo's injury, everyone had gathered here. I'm used to it. You should all know that the Devil Race and the Monster Race are deploying a large number of people to the border. It seems like they can't wait any longer. After reading Hu Baozi's message, Xianji spoke to the other emperors in the Plum Garden. Even though they were enemies with the God Emperor of Heavenly God City in private, judging from his recent behavior, this God Emperor didn't seem to want to fall out with them openly. Since that was the case, Xianji naturally wouldn't disrespect him. A few days ago, he sent some people from the Profound Pavilion back to Heavenly God City, and they went about their duties as usual. Thanks to the Hermit Emperor's miraculous treatment, the injured divine generals had mostly recovered. Only the God of Wine, despite having regained consciousness, was still unable to move like a normal person. He spent most of the day bedridden. The intentions of these two races are getting more and more obvious. Previously, they knew to cover it up a little, but this time, they're not even trying to hide it. They're suppressing the borders with such great fanfare. Zhao Qianling said indifferently. She was also holding a cell phone in her hand. Not only him, but the other great emperors in the Plum Garden also had one each. They were the first users of the cell phone after Mo arrived at the God Race. It was mostly thanks to Yi Zichen that they'd been able to promote their cell phones to such a high level. Right now, all of them belonged to Yi Zichen's faction. Mo's relationship with Yi Zichen had to be kept a secret, but the great emperors didn't need to. Moreover, he couldn't hide it even if he wanted to. Everyone here knew that Mo was Yi Zichen's fated star. "How's the situation at the River Styx?" Yi Rong asked. Naturally, the situation is 100 times more serious than at the border of the God clan. Shuiyang, said, "My main body just sent word that Emperor Hades seems to have entered a period of decline and is currently in seclusion. Whatever is suitable in the river Styx is handled by his disciple, Sukyun. Is it one of the four auxiliary stars?" Bian asked. "That's him." Shuiyang nodded. "Whoa, this game is quite interesting." While everyone was solemnly discussing important matters, the Hermit Emperor sat to the side, playing a small game on his phone. "Senior Hermit Emperor, could it be that you're not interested in the movements of the Yao and demons?" Zhao Qianling asked. "What does this have to do with me?" The Hermit Emperor did not even raise his head as he said, "Even if they really do manage to invade, that is something for you and the God Emperor to worry about. My West Divine Mountains Hermit Palace is just a bunch of doctors. At most, after the big battle, the task of treatment will be more important. Don't tell me you're still counting on the old man. Am I supposed to bring them to the battlefield? That's not what I meant. I mean, forget it. Let's not talk about it." In truth, what Zhao Qianling wanted to express was very simple. She felt that the Hermit Emperor was the god race's most respected existence. He was also the oldest divine emperor, and he controlled the divine mountain. No matter what, he had to be a little concerned about the movements of the devil race and the demon race. However, the Hermit Emperor's words left Zhao Qianling speechless. All she could do was swallow her words and not bring them up again. "You're overthinking things. I used to be like that too, but after all these years, I've finally figured it out. What's the point of overthinking things? What's to come will come. You can't even stop it, and you'll only add to your worries. Besides, it's been a long time since I've cared about the affairs of the world. Whether they fight or not has nothing to do with me. Besides, if you're talking about worrying, Zhou Wu is even more worried than you are." He giggled as he played his little game. At that moment, the Hermit Emperor's hand inexplicably stiffened. Before long, he sighed helplessly, then stowed his phone away in his spatial divine artifact. "I really can't afford to waste any time. See, you said I didn't care about the Yao and demons' affairs, but now I'm getting involved, aren't I? Something happened on the Emperor's star." The great emperors were stunned. They all knew about the talismans the Hermit Emperor had given Yi Zichen. At the time, they'd each prepared a talisman for him, but the Hermit Emperor refused. "Didn't you say nothing would happen to you in the north?" Yi Rong furrowed her brows. Although Yi Rong was grateful the Hermit Emperor had enlightened her, she'd always held a grudge against him. The Hermit Emperor always gave off an unfathomable aura, even in front of people like them. The Hermit Emperor had assured them nothing would happen to the talismans, and Yi Rong wanted to ease the tension between them, so she'd agreed. Now, the Hermit Emperor said he wanted to head to the north. Shouldn't Lady Providence, the one who uncovers all the mysteries of the world, know best whether or not something unexpected will happen? The Hermit Emperor chuckled. "You really don't need to worry, Lord of the Big Dipper. Even if the Emperor's star destroys the talismans, nothing unexpected will happen to him. If I go, I'll at most clear up some of his doubts. Naturally, I'll help him resolve this crisis." "What do you mean?" asked Yi Rong. "Think about what the Emperor's star has in his hands," laughed the Hermit Emperor. The great emperors furrowed their brows, but before long, someone reacted. Their eyes brimmed with astonishment. "Are you saying that person will intervene?" If that person really did intervene, Yi Zichen really wouldn't be in any trouble in the north. After all, that was their territory. Isn't it inevitable that he'll intervene? The Emperor's star will break through to ruler soon. It's not strange for him to establish a friendly relationship with the Emperor's star ahead of time. The Hermit Emperor chuckled, then glanced at Yi Rong. "You're still too young, and you're too impulsive. If this continues, how will you support the Emperor's star? When you're free, spend some time with the Lord of the Big Dipper. Don't tell me you can't get in touch with him." The Hermit Emperor stretched lazily, then beckoned Shuiyang and Bian over. The two great emperors walked off into the distance with the Hermit Emperor. They discussed something, but Shuiyang and Bian's expressions were solemn. After that, the Hermit Emperor shattered the void and left. The others gathered around. What did the Hermit Emperor say? Shuiyang and Bian glanced at each other. Their expressions were solemn. At Zhao Qianling's urging, Shuiyang narrowed his eyes and spoke. "The Hermit Emperor just told us that we can start preparing to fight the enemy." Instantly, The great emperor's hearts trembled. Chapter 1501. The cold wind was bone-chilling. It was as if the borders of the northern kingdom, where birds sang and flowers bloomed, were covered in frost. Yi Zichen couldn't help but sigh. He'd underestimated Gu Li's desire for the key fragment. There were more than 100 people. All of them were experts above the celestial being realm. This number of people was already more than the number of experts in any of the 3 cities of the god, Yao, and demon races. The number of demon experts he'd brought with him was already astonishing. Yi Zichen had once wondered how he'd managed to bring so many people to the Yao Northern Kingdom. Now, there were so many people lying in ambush. Could it be that he had fought his way through city by city? This didn't make sense either. If they really attacked, the king of the Northern Kingdom would not sit idly by. The only possibility was that it had appeared in their auras. Based on their auras, Gu Li's men were all god race experts. Even great sages with the eyes of fire and gold were unable to see through their true forms. How could the people from the north see through them? It seemed that they had used this method of concealing their aura. In addition, the atmosphere of the Northern Kingdom was especially warm to the experts of the god race, so they had used this opportunity to come to the Northern Kingdom. What a generous gesture! The trapped Yi Zichen couldn't help but mutter to himself. Forget about Gu Li's 2 special envoys. Just the other demon experts were enough to give him and the great sage a headache. For a moment, he regretted shattering the Hermit Emperor's talisman, even if it meant summoning him over. He felt that it would be very difficult to turn the situation around. Are you surprised? Are you excited? When he saw Yi Zichen's somewhat ashen expression, Gu Li stuck his hands into his pockets mockingly, then arched his eyebrows and smiled mockingly. It felt so good. These were Gu Li's truest thoughts. Once again, he gained the upper hand in his clash with Yi Zichen. That's the look in his eyes. What he wanted to see was Yi Zichen's current appearance. Surprise. Anger. There's also a tinge of bitterness. Regardless of whether Yi Zichen felt that way or not, that was what Gu Li read from his expression. Run. Now you run again. Why did he suddenly stop? Couldn't he be that good at running? The people in front are your Protoss compatriots. Hurry up and negotiate with them so that they can let you go. Or you can tell them that you are the master of the Emperor's Star of Z-Wei, one of the candidates for transcendence in the future. See if they are willing. Be your lackey? Gu Li laughed sinisterly. A sinister smile hung on his face as he stared directly into Yi Zichen's eyes. Looking at him now, it felt like his temperament was a little twisted. You've got some tricks up your sleeve, said Yi Zichen coolly. You've really planned ahead. You actually set up an ambush outside the city. Yi. The great sage's divine sense transmission rang out in Yi Zichen's sea of consciousness. Don't worry, said Yi Zichen. I've already crushed the talisman the Hermit Emperor left me. It shouldn't be long before the Hermit Emperor hurries over, and perhaps even the other great emperors. That's easy. The great saint of the demon race clenched the Jingu Bang in his right hand and grinned. Enter the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and wait for the other great emperors. Then Lai Shun, will naturally play with them. The great sage's expression was ferocious. I've been repressed ever since I was born in the north, and I've been looking for a place to vent. Can I trust you? Said Yi Zichen solemnly. Just wait and see. These bastards can't hurt me. My title as the victorious fighting Buddha isn't for nothing, said the great sage. That seemed like the best course of action. Naturally, he wanted to fight alongside the great sage, but both he and the great sage knew that, given his current cultivation, even with his mastery of the 5 elements, it would be difficult for him to protect himself. There were simply too many people here. Entering the Yao Ceiling Pagoda and waiting for reinforcements was the best choice. If the great sage was willing to fight outside, then so be it. If something really did happen to him, Yi Zichen could take him inside the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. All right, then be careful. Yi Zichen nodded. With that, Yi Zichen's divine sense connected to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda. The great sage hefted the Jingu Bang, his aura billowing to the heavens as he prepared to attack the demons. Hey, the connection was severed. Yi Zichen's connection to the Yao Ceiling Pagoda had been completely severed. His divine sense was sealed, and a black-robed man appeared before him. The envoy of the left. Gu Li's envoy of the left stood in front of him. His hand was pressed against Yi Zichen's forehead, sealing his divine sense from the very source. The great sage quickly noticed this and swung his Jingu bang viciously at the envoy of the left. However, someone caught him midway. The right envoy. This time, it was Gu Li's right envoy. He wore a pair of black leather gloves that glowed with a faint light. His hand clenched tightly around the great sage's iron staff. He couldn't move it in the slightest. At the same time, the great sage's 5 vitals were pressed against his weapon. His movements were completely sealed. You can't enter the Yao Sealing Pagoda. If you do, things will get troublesome. Gu Li rubbed his hands, then slowly looked up and glanced coldly at Yi Zichen. The Yao Sealing Pagoda is the #1 divine artifact among all auxiliary divine artifacts. Although it's no longer on the rankings, it's still unoccupied. The Yao Sealing Pagoda was forged from meteorites Emperor Hades found in the outside. Coupled with a host of other expensive materials, even an Emperor-level expert would find it difficult to shake the pagoda. You call it an auxiliary divine artifact, but in truth, it's also a defensive divine artifact. If I let you in and you're determined to hide inside like a turtle, I really can't do anything to you. Gu Li circled Yi Zichen with his hands behind his back. However, even now, Yi Zichen's lips still curved in a barely discernible smile. Gu Li didn't know where that smile came from, but he was furious. He punched Yi Zichen in the stomach. His stomach spasmed, and he coughed up acid. At the same time, Gu Li grabbed Yi Zichen's chin. Why don't you give me another smile? Why should I listen to you? If you want me to smile, I'll smile. Do you think I don't care about face? Said Yi Zichen. Hand over the God Emperor's tomb's key fragment, said Gu Li. If I don't, do you dare kill me? Said Yi Zichen. Gu Li tightened his grip. Yi Zichen could hear the bones in his jaw creak. After glaring at him a few more times, Gu Li swung Yi Zichen's head away. I really don't know where you get your confidence from. How dare you talk to me like that? Gu Li wiped his hands on Yi Zichen's clothes, then narrowed his eyes. In the past, there'd always be people who'd try to save you. This time, everyone here is mine. Why don't you try and find someone else to save you? Chapter 1502. Gu Li's words were filled with mockery and provocation. When he heard the transmission, he came to an abrupt halt. He glanced at the envoys and saw that they were frowning deeply. Despite their cultivation, they couldn't immediately pinpoint the speaker's location. Holy Master, it's an expert, the envoy of the right whispered into Gu Li's ear. Where is he? It didn't matter if he was an expert or not. He had to pinpoint his location. In response to Gu Li's question, the envoys shook their heads. The instant the transmission appeared, they'd searched for the speaker's location. Even now, they still hadn't found any trace of him. At that moment, Gu Li's heart trembled. Then, he looked at Yi Zichen with even more venomous hatred. You're really something. Gu Li couldn't remember how many times this had happened. Whenever Yi Zichen was on the brink of death, a few ignorant fools would always show up. What infuriated him even more was how powerless he felt in the face of these people who'd come to save Yi Zichen. This time, he really didn't disappoint. Another one had come. However, he was different from before. In the past, he'd always relied on himself. Now, he had the Demon Emperor's support, and the envoys of the left and right were both demon god experts. They already stood at the very peak of the 3 realms. Gu Li refused to believe he'd fail again. Since someone's here, I'll let you live a little longer. Gu Li smiled sinisterly, then turned back to face the sky and laughed heartily 3 times. You want me to let him go for your sake? You should at least let me see your face, right? Don't hide up there. If you want to plead on his behalf, then come down and meet me. The envoy of the left clung to Yi Zichen's shoulders, then reinforced and sealed his spiritual sea several times. The great sage couldn't help but glance at Yi Zichen. Sensing his gaze, Yi Zichen glanced back, then shook his head. Yi Zichen understood the great sage's meaning. He wanted to ask if the newcomer was the Hermit Emperor. Yi Zichen shook his head to indicate that it wasn't, but rather that he didn't know either. The transmission just now hadn't been the Hermit Emperor's. However, the way he saw it, The only person who could come at this time was the Hermit Emperor. He really couldn't think of anyone else. He looked up into the sky, wanting to see if it was the Hermit Emperor. Who would have thought? It's not very convenient. The voice transmission came from all directions again. Ghoulie instantly laughed. He didn't know whether he'd headed in the direction of the transmission or not. In short, he was looking up at the void with a funny look in his eyes. Brother, your words are truly interesting. You hid in the sky like a coward, then sent me a transmission telling me to let Yi Zichen go. In the end, you still don't want to show your face. Do you think that I was scared since I was young? Do you really think that I would let you go just because you played some tricks on me? His words seemed to cause the person who had transmitted his voice to pause, and only after a long time did everyone hear a sigh. Your devil race has invaded the Northern Kingdom with such great fanfare, causing unrest in several cities around Blue Wave City. I didn't blame you because I wanted you to know your place. The monarch of the Northern Kingdom. Yi Zichen's eyes widened. From the sound of it, it sounded like the person in the sky was the king of the Northern Kingdom. He wasn't the only one. Ghoulie realized the transmission's identity as well, but he didn't believe it. Instead, he sneered. Are you trying to say you're the king of the Northern Kingdom? How interesting. With just a few words, you're pretending to be the king of the Northern Kingdom. If you really are, then show yourself. What need is there to hide in the sky? Ignorant. Suddenly, a bowl-sized hole appeared in the clouds in the sky. A beam of azure light tore through the sky. Despite their cultivations, the left and right envoys couldn't see what was inside the azure light. All they could see was that it was heading straight for Ghoulie. Holy Master, be careful. The right envoy roared, then frowned deeply. He took a step forward and unleashed a torrent of demonic power. Instantly, everything within a few hundred meters transformed into a purple demonic domain. To their surprise, the azure light didn't even pause when it touched the demonic domain. The left envoy's pupils constricted, and the right envoy's brows sank. It's too late. The beam of azure light was simply too fast. Furthermore, the space around it was compressed and distorted. Boom! Rubble flew everywhere. The ear-piercing sound of the explosion was unbearable. The right envoy protected Ghoulie fiercely a second before the beam of azure light landed on him. However, perhaps the transmitter had never intended to take Ghoulie's life in the first place. The beam of azure light didn't even land on him. Instead, it landed half a meter in front of him. When the azure light dissipated, everyone saw that it was actually an azure medallion. After confirming that Ghoulie wasn't injured, the left envoy frowned and reached out with his right hand. The medallion, embedded in the ground, trembled a few times, then fell into the left envoy's hand. The left envoy looked at the medallion. When he saw the runes and words on it, his pupils constricted. When the right envoy sensed the change in the left envoy's expression, he was the most shocked. Although they hadn't grown up together, they'd known each other for 10,000 years. The left envoy was a man of few words and never smiled. However, his mental fortitude was unmatched by ordinary people. In the past 10,000 years, the right envoy had rarely seen the left envoy so panicked. He gently hooked his finger towards the azure medallion in the left envoy's practically frozen hand. When the medallion landed in the right envoy's hand, his brows instantly furrowed. The azure medallion trembled violently, then burrowed back into the sky. Ghoulie looked at the two serious envoys and said, "What was that?" "Holy Master, let's retreat." "Holy Master, let's retreat," said the right envoy with a frown. "What exactly was that?" asked Ghoulie solemnly. The right envoy narrowed his eyes and transmitted his divine sense to Ghoulie. When he learned the newcomer's identity, Ghoulie's expression froze despite himself. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," nodded the right envoy. Beneath his robes, Ghoulie clenched his fists tightly. Then he looked intently at Yi Zichen. Why? So long as he was in danger, someone would always come to his rescue. Once or twice was one thing. He refused to accept this. He bit his lip so hard that purple blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. "Die!" To everyone's surprise, Ghoulie glared at him and reached for Yi Zichen's chest. This scene frightened the left and right envoys. At the same time, A cold snort echoed through the sky. I gave you face, but you refused it. A beam of azure light descended from the sky, shattering Gu Li's entire right arm. Holy Master,